You're sitting across from someone who once made you feel seen, a friend, maybe a colleague. You're mid-sentence trying to share something that matters to you when they interrupt. They take the idea, twist it into something shallow, then toss it aside with a half smile. "That's kind of stupid though, isn't it?" they say, and you laugh, you nod, you let them finish the drink while you finish pretending not to care. And when it's over and you walk home in silence, the question returns: why do I feel smaller around them, and why do I never say anything? That's what happens when saying no isn't in your system. Not just no to actions, but no to disrespect. No to people crossing your edges like they're invisible. No to the way you're spoken to, looked at, handled. Most people don't even realize how many times they abandon themselves in the name of being agreeable. They don't hear the yes as betrayal because it comes out dressed as politeness, efficiency, peacekeeping. But the body knows, the resentment builds, and the pattern solidifies. You're at work, someone drops a task on you that was never yours. A last-minute email, a forgotten report, something they should have done but didn't, and they say it like it's nothing. Could you just? You're already behind on your own deadlines, your mind overloaded, but your mouth says, yeah, no problem. You even smile while saying it, not because you want to help, but because you've been trained to value smoothness over boundaries, perception over truth, reputation over peace. Later that day, you're with someone close to you. Family, maybe a partner. They plan your evening without asking, tell you what time you're leaving, where you're going, how long you'll stay. And instead of pushing back, you pretend it's fine. You say cool and follow along. Your mind counts the hours. You smile when expected. You listen while waiting to go home. You don't speak up because part of you still thinks, saying no creates conflict and I don't want to be a burden. But the longer you live like this, the more you say yes when your body says no, the less you recognize yourself in your own choices. You begin to resent not just others, but your own reflection. The way you're so easy to sway. The way you always put yourself last and then call it maturity. You stop trusting your own voice because you never let it speak. And this isn't just about words. It's not just learning to say no in a textbook sense. It's about posture, presence, that moment when someone asks something of you and instead of shrinking, you stay still. You let the tension rise, you let the silence hold, you don't rush to fill it with yes, you don't start apologizing. You just stay where you are and say no, clear, firm, without explanation, no backpedaling, no fake smiles, no guilt. The first time you do this, you'll feel guilty. That's how deep the training goes. But with every no that comes from clarity, your yes starts to mean something again. You regain shape. People around you notice, not because you're louder, but because you've stopped dissolving. Just think about how different your life would feel if every time you wanted to say no, you actually said it, without hesitation, without softening the edge, without asking for permission to exist. Most people spend their lives avoiding the tension of refusal, but that tension is where self-respect lives. So next time when your mouth starts to say sure, stop and ask, am I agreeing or disappearing? And if the answer is disappearing, maybe it's time to practice something else. You probably already do this, just not on purpose. You ask someone for something small, they say yes, then a little more, they say yes again, and before long you're getting the real thing you wanted from the beginning without resistance, not because you manipulated them, but because psychologically people don't like inconsistency. Once they've said yes once, it becomes harder to say no the second time. Their brain starts aligning with the action, not just the logic. It works the other way too. You've been on the receiving end. Someone asks you, can you help me with this one file? Sure, you say. Then it becomes, actually, can you send it? Then, could you also format it? And 10 minutes later, you're doing half their job and wondering how it happened. It happened because saying yes rewires the trajectory of a conversation. It shifts the dynamic. At work, someone asks you to quickly check something. You do. Then they assume you're now involved. You've opened the door, now they push it. You feel the pressure to be consistent, to not reverse your agreement. So you keep going, not because you want to, but because you feel obligated by your own behavior. In relationships, it's even stronger. Someone asks to borrow something small, your time, your energy, your attention. You give a little, they ask for more. You feel like if you say no now, you're being unfair, but you're not. You're just realizing that small doors lead to big entries. That saying yes isn't neutral, it's directional. It creates momentum. And once you're in, it's harder to back out without looking unstable. This is why learning to use the yes ladder intentionally can change the way you ask for things and the way you give them. If you need something big from someone, whether it's time, trust, commitment, you don't start there. You start with something they already believe in, something easy to agree with, something they already do. And once that yes is verbal, the inertia is on your side. It's not manipulation, it's alignment. You're helping their brain catch up with a decision their body already started making. You say, do you believe in improving communication? Yes. Would you be open to trying something small for that? Yes. What if we commit to this new thing for a week? By then, the resistance is gone. You're not pushing, you're guiding. But this isn't just a tool for asking. It's also a warning. Notice when people use it on you. Notice how a small favor turns into regular responsibility. Notice how you're eased into obligations, not forced. And remember that every yes shapes the path ahead, so give it carefully. If you learn to see the ladder, you learn to climb it, and also when to step off. There's a strange thing about people. They'll say yes more often when you give them a reason, even if the reason doesn't really matter. Someone cuts in line and says, "Can I go ahead?" People hesitate. But if they say, "Can I go ahead because I'm in a hurry?" more people say yes, not because they agree, but because there was a because. The brain wants structure, cause and effect. It wants to understand why. You do it too, you're more likely to respond to someone who explains themselves, who frames their request in a context, who doesn't just say, "Can you help me?" but says, "Can you help me because I'm really behind and I trust your input." It doesn't have to be profound, it just has to exist. At work, instead of saying, "I need this done by tomorrow," say, "I need this done by tomorrow because it's part of the client's delivery window." You'll see less resistance. People want reasons, even simple ones. In conversation, you're more likely to gain agreement if you say, "Let's meet at 5 because traffic gets worse after that." It grounds the ask in logic. It makes you sound like someone who thinks ahead, someone who doesn't just want things, someone who understands why they matter. Even in relationships, saying, "I wish you decall more" hits differently than "I wish you decall more because I feel disconnected when we don't talk." The first sounds like demand, the second sounds like insight. Because is the bridge between intent and action. When you use it, you stop sounding like someone who just wants things. You sound like someone who knows why they matter. Start paying attention to how often people give you a reason and how differently you react when they do. And then ask yourself, why ask without giving context, when the simplest word in language already tilts the odds in your favor? Because it works. Because it's how the mind processes trust. Because people need a reason, even when they don't need a reason. You tell yourself you want to get in shape, to write a book, to start a business, to fix your sleep, to save more money, to feel better, and all of it sounds noble, purposeful, like the kind of person you could become if you just had time or focus or clarity. But the truth is your brain doesn't respond well to massive abstract goals with no map. It responds to motion, to immediacy, to structure that feels close and real and possible. And the easiest way to create that structure is to start thinking in terms of 1 month at a time. 1 month is long enough to matter, short enough to finish, concrete enough to visualize, and when you give yourself 30 days with a clearly defined target, not a vague aspiration like get healthier, but something you can count or track like work out 3 times a week, or go to sleep before midnight 20 out of 30 nights, your brain starts shifting into motion mode, and suddenly the thing that felt overwhelming becomes digestible. Think about how many years you've said, "This is my year," and how fast that year slips into guilt because it was never broken down. It was just a fantasy calendar without check marks. And you didn't fail because you lacked ambition. You failed because you never turned it into a month. You wake up on the first of the month and say, "This is my focus, one goal, not 10, one that fits into the shape of a month, one that you can review and restart and refine," and you let each month become its own experiment, instead of treating time like a single pressure-filled marathon. Imagine if every month for a year you picked one theme, not perfection, not transformation, just focus. 1 month to track what you eat, 1 month to fix your posture, 1 month to call your parents every Sunday, 1 month to write 1,000 words a day, 1 month to cut social media in half, 1 month to take walks every evening. By the end of the year, you wouldn't be the same person, not because you planned to be great, but because you lived in small, repeatable shifts. Big goals break you when you chase them all at once, but short-term goals teach you momentum. And momentum is more powerful than motivation because it doesn't need inspiration to survive, just repetition. Your problem isn't laziness, it's architecture. Build smaller months, not bigger dreams. Someone says something that hits you wrong, maybe it's condescending, maybe it's dismissive, maybe it's subtle but cutting, and you feel the surge in your chest, the heat behind your eyes, the words rushing to your mouth, and then you pause. Not because you're weak, not because you're scared, but because that half-second of silence gives you back control. It cuts through the automatic and turns the reaction into a response. Most people don't realize how much of their regret comes from instant reactions, from saying something too soon, from replying without thinking, from trying to defend their ego faster than they can understand the situation. But the power of pause is like a secret lever in your mind that slows time just enough for you to choose instead of react. In a meeting, someone takes credit for your work, and your first instinct is to speak up, loud, sharp, emotional, but you pause. And in that pause, you find your composure, your calm tone, your ability to say, actually, I'd like to clarify how that came together, instead of blurting out something reactive that you'll regret later. In an argument, your partner says something unfair, and you want to snap back, to hurt them as much as you feel hurt. But you pause, you breathe, you remember what the conversation is really about, and you speak from clarity, not from pain, and the argument doesn't escalate, it deflates. Even in daily annoyances, someone cuts you off in traffic, sends a rude message, makes a passive-aggressive comment, that one breath, that 2-second delay, that invisible pause is what separates the person who's at the mercy of their emotions from the person who steers them. The pause is small, but its effects are massive. It changes outcomes, it preserves relationships, it prevents self-sabotage, and most importantly, it builds a version of you who doesn't have to be afraid of their own reactions. You don't pause to suppress, you pause to direct. Every time you speak without thinking, you give away power, but every time you pause, even for a second, you take it back. You're walking through your day like usual, doing tasks, checking boxes, talking to people. And then, for no reason you can explain, your mind drops into a hole. Maybe it's a spiral of doubt. Maybe it's a memory that loops. Maybe it's a sudden wave of hopelessness or insecurity or fear, and you don't know where it came from, but now it's there, heavy and loud and believable. That's what mental stopping is for, the deliberate interruption of the spiral, the conscious choice to say, this isn't the direction I'm letting this thought take me. It doesn't mean denial, it doesn't mean pretending everything's fine. It means recognizing when a mental narrative is hijacking your state and having the tools to break its momentum. Most people live at the mercy of their thoughts. They think whatever appears, feel whatever that thought triggers, and follow it wherever it wants to go, like a dog dragged on a leash by a car it didn't choose to chase. Mental stopping is you grabbing the leash and saying, stop, we're not going there. It looks like noticing the thought, I'm failing, nobody cares, this is hopeless, and instead of arguing with it or feeding it, you say out loud or silently, stop. And then you do something that shifts the track, a physical gesture like standing up, splashing water on your face, stretching your arms, changing your environment, playing music, or just naming a different sentence on purpose. I'm still learning. This isn't the whole story. This moment doesn't define everything. You don't need to believe the new thought yet. You just need to interrupt the old one long enough to weaken its grip. At work, when something goes wrong, your mind might start spinning, I'll be blamed. This ruins everything. I can't handle this, and the longer that spiral continues, the more you feel like the collapse is real. But if you've trained yourself to notice the pattern and apply mental stopping, you break the story before it grows teeth. In relationships, when someone pulls away or doesn't reply or seems distant, your mind might say, they're done with me. I always ruin things, nobody stays. And if you let that thought go unchallenged, it becomes your mood, your behavior, your self-image. But a simple mental stop can create just enough distance to see it as a story, not a truth. This habit isn't about avoiding emotion, it's about interrupting distortion. Because once the thought grows roots, it feeds itself, and by then you're not thinking, you're drowning. But if you learn to stop it early, not with force, but with awareness, you start reclaiming your emotional space, and over time, you realize that you don't have to believe everything your brain says just because it says it. Not every thought is an order, not every emotion is a prophecy, and not every spiral is your truth. Sometimes it's just noise, and you can turn the volume down. You're standing in line or talking to someone new at work or catching up with someone you vaguely know, and everything feels neutral, polite, forgettable, small talk about the weather or the weekend or some vague topic with no anchor. And then they say your name just once casually, but it lands like a warm hand on your shoulder, grounding the moment into something real. There's a reason hearing your own name feels different. It lights up your brain's attention system, it triggers recognition, it reminds you that you exist, that you're being seen, and that someone is intentionally speaking to you, not just talking in general. Most people underestimate how powerful this is in building connection. Saying someone's name doesn't make you manipulative, it makes you present, because instead of talking to a role, a title, a placeholder, you're talking to a person. And when you start doing this in your conversations, when you greet people by name, respond to questions with their name, even occasionally end a thought with their name, You create tiny spikes of familiarity, and those spikes build trust faster than any charm or joke or common interest ever could. At work, you could say, "That's a great point, Anna," instead of just, "That's a great point," and suddenly Anna feels heard, not just agreed with. With a friend, instead of saying, "You always do that," you say, "You always do that, Marcus," and it softens the accusation, makes it feel less like an attack and more like a shared memory. Even in conflict, especially in conflict, using someone's name can calm the tone, can make it feel like two people trying to solve something together rather than enemies drawing lines. Think about how distant people feel when they never use your name, how it feels like you're interchangeable, like you're just a function in their script. And now think about how rare it is to hear your name used with care, and how much more attention you give to the people who do it. In dating, in sales, in leadership, in friendship, this habit costs nothing and changes everything. Because names are how we're rooted in language, how we know we exist in someone else's awareness. And if you can say someone's name with intention, they'll remember it long after they forget the rest of the sentence. You're walking into a room where you don't quite know the rules. Maybe it's a casual work event, or a meetup with strangers, or even just a random day running errands, and in your head, you debate what to wear, trying not to overdo it, not to stand out too much, not to make others uncomfortable. So you go simple, maybe even lazy, a hoodie, or something you've worn 100 times, and you blend in, you stay invisible, you keep the peace, but something in you feels slightly dimmed, like you left confidence at home without realizing. Now reverse it, imagine that same day, but you decide to dress just one level above what's expected, not in a flashy or arrogant way, but with clarity, with care, with a choice that says, "I'm showing up." You put on a shirt that fits well, shoes that aren't scuffed, maybe even a watch or an accessory that catches light, and the moment you see yourself in the mirror, something clicks, not ego, not vanity, just presence. You walk differently, you speak slower, you make more eye contact, not because the clothes give you power, but because they remind you that you're someone who chooses how to show up. Most people think of clothing as either fashion or function, but they forget that it's also identity. And when you make small upgrades to your appearance, you're not dressing for other people, you're dressing for the version of you that remembers you're not invisible. At work, this shows up when people treat you with slightly more respect, even if they can't explain why. In social situations, it shows up when people listen closer, respond more attentively, gravitate toward you in subtle ways. And internally, it shows up in how quickly you stop apologizing for your presence. This doesn't mean becoming obsessed with image, or spending a fortune, or chasing trends. It means understanding that every detail you wear is a message to yourself first. If you're slouching through life in clothes that whisper, "Don't notice me," you're reinforcing invisibility. But when you dress like you matter, your brain begins to believe it. It's not about suits or brands, it's about alignment, about telling your mind, "Today I care, so let's act like it." You're in a long conversation with someone you care about, a friend, a partner, a sibling, and the talk starts veering toward tension. Something small maybe, like an unwashed dish, a forgotten text, a tone of voice that sounded cold, and suddenly the energy shifts. You say something critical, and then they defend, and then you push, and then they push back, and the mood goes from light to distant in under a minute. You both mean well, but somehow the conversation is heavier than it should be, and what most people don't realize is that it's not the disagreement that hurts relationships, it's the ratio of negativity to positivity. There's a simple rule that comes from relationship psychology. For every one moment of criticism, conflict, or negativity, there should be at least 5 moments of warmth, affection, praise, appreciation, or joy. Not to manipulate, not to sugarcoat, but to balance. Think about your closest relationship. Now ask yourself, how many positive interactions happen for every negative one? Do you compliment them as much as you correct them? Do you notice their efforts as often as their mistakes? Do you smile, touch, or thank them 5 times for every one time you sigh or raise your voice? Because the math matters, when the ratio slips, even slightly, relationships start feeling cold, defensive, distant, not because anyone did something huge, but because the emotional ledger feels off. In romantic relationships, this looks like saying, "I appreciate you making dinner," more often than you forgot again. In friendships, it looks like, "That made me laugh so hard," more often than you never answer your phone. In family dynamics, it looks like, "I'm proud of you," more than "Why did you do that again?" And the beautiful part is these positive moments don't need to be grand or dramatic. A look, a thank you, a shared memory, a compliment, a genuine smile, they all count. Relationships don't fail from one big explosion, they fade from the slow erosion of joy. So the next time you catch yourself being critical or annoyed, pause, then add 5 touches of warmth, not to cancel the negativity, but to surround it with care. Because in the end, love is not about being perfect, it's about building a ratio that protects connection, even when things get hard. You're in a conversation with someone who keeps interrupting you mid-sentence, or they suddenly make a passive-aggressive comment that you weren't expecting, or they say something disrespectful. And before your brain can process what's happening, you feel it, that subtle jolt in your chest, your throat tightening, your words sharpening before you even realize what you're about to say, and suddenly it's out, a sarcastic comeback, a defensive remark, a raised voice you didn't intend, and now the atmosphere is different. Tenser, colder, maybe even irreversible, and later that night when you replay the moment in your head, you wish you had handled it differently. You wish you had taken a second to breathe, to think, to respond from clarity instead of ego. Most people believe that emotional intelligence means staying calm all the time. But in truth, it's not about suppressing emotion. It's about slowing down the gap between what happens and how you respond. It's about recognizing that your first impulse, the one laced with adrenaline, isn't always the one that reflects your values, your goals, or your best self. The strongest people aren't the ones who dominate every room, who fight back at every insult, who defend their pride at every corner. The strongest people are the ones who can feel a trigger building inside them and still choose to wait, even if it's just for 2 seconds, because in those 2 seconds they reclaim their power, they remove the situation from autopilot and place it back into conscious hands. You don't need to react to everything immediately, you don't need to defend every insult, you don't need to clarify every misunderstanding the second it happens, and once you learn that silence doesn't equal weakness, you start to experience a different kind of control, a grounded control, one where your peace isn't dictated by what someone else says, but by how much you allow it to affect you. This doesn't mean you let people walk over you, it means you respond on your own terms, not theirs, and when you master this, conversations that used to derail your mood no longer do, people who used to trigger you suddenly lose their power, and situations that once ruined your whole day now pass like background noise. Every time you feel yourself about to say something just to relieve the tension, just to hit back, just to win the moment, ask yourself if the emotional cost is worth it. Because most of the time, it's not, and in hindsight, you'll wish you had kept your peace instead of proving your point. Self-control is not about silence, it's about intention. It's about giving your nervous system time to cool off before letting your mouth represent your whole personality. And the more you practice it, the more people around you will begin to notice something different, that you're not reactive, you're composed, and that when you do speak, it actually matters. If you can master just this one habit, delaying your reactions by even a few seconds, you will find that most conflict loses its grip on your life, most arguments feel unnecessary, and most emotional chaos fades before it even begins. You think you're listening, but you're really just waiting for your turn to talk. You're nodding and maybe making eye contact, but your mind is already preparing a response, crafting your next sentence, drifting into your own stories, and the person in front of you feels it. They can't explain it, but they can sense that you're not really with them, that you're scanning their words for hooks to pull the conversation back to yourself. True listening, active listening, is not just hearing words, it's absorbing them, sitting with them, feeling what the other person is actually trying to say beyond the surface. It's shutting off the running commentary in your head and giving someone else your full attention, not because it's polite, but because it's rare. When you practice active listening, you're not just focusing on the facts, you're tuning into the emotion behind them, the subtle shifts in tone, the pauses that carry weight, the phrases that repeat for a reason, and instead of jumping in with advice or judgment, you reflect what you've heard, you clarify gently, you create space for them to go deeper. You're not interrupting with solutions, you're not racing to validate your own experience, you're not trying to be helpful just so you can feel needed. Instead, you're just there, not solving, not steering, not comparing, just holding space. When someone feels that kind of presence from you, where they don't have to earn your attention, where they don't have to fight to be heard, something shifts, their shoulders drop, their words become more honest, their guard lowers, not because you said the perfect thing, but because they finally feel safe being human around you. In friendships, this builds trust. In relationships, it prevents unnecessary fights. In leadership, it inspires loyalty. And even with strangers, it creates a strange sense of familiarity, as if they've known you longer than they have, all because, for once, they didn't feel alone while speaking. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room to be the most impactful. You just need to be the quietest for long enough to actually hear what people are saying underneath their words. And if you can develop that habit, to listen with the intent to understand, not to reply, you will find that people start showing up differently around you, not because you changed them, but because you finally gave them space to show up as they really are. Your day ends and your brain, like it always does, begins to list everything you didn't do, every task still unchecked, every message you didn't respond to, every habit you broke, every plan you pushed until tomorrow, and this invisible weight settles in your chest, the weight of another day that felt busy but somehow still felt like a failure. You tell yourself you'll do better tomorrow, but the truth is, this cycle repeats because your brain is trained to look for problems, not progress. It's wired to find what's missing, not what's working, and unless you consciously interrupt that pattern, you will always end your days feeling behind, even when you're not. That's where a daily success journal comes in, not a planner, not a task list, not some big motivational ritual, just a quiet practice before bed where you write down a few things that went right. Maybe you completed something small you've been avoiding for weeks. Maybe you didn't snooze your alarm today. Maybe you held back from saying something you'd normally regret. Maybe you reached out to someone you've been thinking about. It doesn't have to be impressive. It just has to be real. And what this does over time is simple but powerful. It shifts your attention from failure to growth, from lack to progress, from vague guilt to specific pride, and slowly you start to realize that you're doing better than you think. You begin to see your own consistency. You start building self-trust, because the evidence is there in your own handwriting, proof that you're not as chaotic or undisciplined or lazy as your anxious brain wants you to believe. And on days when everything feels like a mess, you can flip back and see the pattern, not of perfection, but of effort, of trying, of showing up even when you didn't feel like it, and that alone can keep you going. Most people remember the one thing they didn't do, not the 10 things they did, and that's why so many lose motivation, not because they're failing, but because they're forgetting their own progress. If you want to build momentum, build memory. If you want to feel motivated, feel witnessed, even if it's just by yourself. This habit takes 5 minutes and zero talent, but the impact it has on your mindset, your self-worth, and your long-term consistency is massive, because when your mind starts to expect success, your actions naturally follow. Write it down, not for Instagram, not for perfection, but for the quiet part of you that needs proof you're growing, even on the days that feel still. There's a kind of quiet panic that settles in when you try to carry everything yourself, when your mind becomes a to-do list that never ends, when your day is a stream of switching contexts, remembering deadlines, tracking details, managing people, fixing mistakes, and pretending it's all fine while you slowly fall apart inside. And the worst part is it's not because the tasks are impossible, it's because you refuse to let them go. You convince yourself that no one else will do it right or not as fast or not with the same standard, and so you tighten your grip, believing that control equals quality, that overwork equals dedication, that exhaustion is just the price of competence. But eventually, your mind gets cloudy, your creativity disappears, and even your best efforts start to feel like survival. Delegation isn't just about being efficient, it's about respecting your own limits. It's about knowing that your time and energy are finite, and that every hour you spend micromanaging something someone else could do is an hour stolen from the work only you can do. But most people don't delegate because they're afraid of mistakes, of judgment, of being seen as lazy or replaceable, afraid that letting go means losing value. But the truth is, knowing what to let go of is a higher level skill than knowing how to do everything yourself. Delegation requires clarity about your priorities, your strengths, your time, your bandwidth, and it requires trust, not blind faith, but structured support, where you communicate expectations, check in without hovering, and give people the chance to rise, to learn, to contribute. And when you do it right, something surprising happens. The people around you grow, your team becomes stronger, your own stress levels drop, your strategic thinking improves, and you realize that leadership is not about holding everything together alone. It's about building a system that thrives even without your constant input. If your life feels overloaded, it's not because you're weak, it's because you're not delegating. And if your mind feels burnt out, it's not because you lack discipline. It's because you're trying to do everyone's job at the expense of your own clarity. You are not supposed to be the bottleneck, the backup, and the boss all at once. You are allowed to pass the baton, not because you're incapable, but because you're finally focused. It happens before you notice it. You're walking, or working, or just lying in bed, and suddenly a voice starts whispering quietly in the back of your mind, a voice that sounds like your own but cuts deeper than anyone else ever could, a voice that says you're behind, you're not enough, you're faking it, you're going to fail, and the worst part is you believe it. You don't even question the voice because it doesn't shout, it loops, it repeats. It latches onto the smallest mistake or the most uncertain moment and expands it until it becomes the whole picture, and you feel trapped in your own thinking, dragged by a current you didn't even choose to step into. But here's the truth: just because a thought feels automatic doesn't mean it's true, and just because it sounds familiar doesn't mean it's useful. Your brain has patterns, and one of those patterns is rehearsal. It replays what you feed it, especially fear, regret, shame, and comparison. Mental stopping is the skill of interruption, the deliberate decision to break the loop, not by forcing positivity, but by breaking the trance, by catching the thought mid-sentence and choosing not to finish it, by saying stop out loud if needed, and redirecting your attention to anything more grounding. It's like changing the channel on a station that only plays insults, not because the station disappears, but because you finally stopped dancing to its music. You replace "I'm such an idiot" with "that didn't go how I wanted, but I can adjust." You replace "they all hate me" with "I'm feeling vulnerable right now, and that's okay." You replace "I can't do this" with "this is hard and I'm still learning." And over time, these small shifts begin to rewire the pattern. Most people wait until the spiral is too deep, until the emotions have already flooded their system, but mental stopping works best early, like a mental smoke alarm, when you notice the smell of burning thought and you catch it before it turns into fire. This isn't about denying pain, it's about not feeding it your full attention. It's about building a mind that knows when to pause, when to redirect, when to say not today. And the more you practice this, the more you realize that your thoughts are not you, they're just content, and like any content, you have the power to skip it. Stop the loop, reclaim the channel, choose your focus. You're in a conversation where something doesn't sit right, a request you don't agree with, a comment that crosses a boundary, a situation where your instinct says no, but your mouth prepares to say sure because it's easier, more polite, less dramatic, and in that moment a small part of you folds, and you tell yourself it's not a big deal until it keeps happening. And slowly, over time, you realize that people assume your silence is agreement, that your "it's okay" becomes a green light for things that aren't okay, that your flexibility is being stretched into invisibility, and now you're carrying resentment for things you never voiced. Assertive communication is not about confrontation. It's not about being louder, ruder, or more dominant. It's about speaking clearly, calmly, and directly, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when your voice shakes, even when someone might not like it. It's the art of saying, "No, I'm not available for that," without guilt. "That doesn't work for me," without apology. "Here's what I need," without shrinking, and "I hear you, but I disagree," without needing to win. Most people mistake passivity for kindness and aggression for strength, but assertiveness lives in the middle. It respects both your truth and theirs, it allows space for disagreement without disrespect, and it keeps your relationships honest, sustainable, and real. You don't need to explain your worth, you don't need to justify your preferences, you don't need to cushion your truth with 1,000 disclaimers, and once you realize this, you stop diluting yourself for the comfort of others. The most important boundary you'll ever set is the moment you decide that your voice is not a disruption. It's a declaration of who you are, what you stand for, and what you're no longer willing to swallow just to keep the peace. Practice it daily in small ways. Speak up when something bothers you, clarify when something is unclear, ask for what you need without apology, and most importantly, stop saying it's fine when it's not. The more you do this, the more confident you become, not because people start treating you better, but because you do. You're sitting alone, maybe in your room, maybe on your way to work, maybe at dinner with friends pretending to listen. And without warning, your mind starts playing its favorite rerun, something you said wrong 2 days ago, something you failed at last month, a fear about something that hasn't even happened yet, and you feel it, that quiet drop in your stomach, the tension in your jaw, the way your mood shifts without anyone noticing. And the thoughts feel real. "I'm not good enough. They probably think I'm annoying. What if I fail again?" They slide in with the tone of truth, not like a theory, but like a fact, and it's tempting to follow them, to spiral, to believe them because they feel familiar, and familiar is easy to confuse with accurate. But negative thoughts are not instructions, they're habits, they're patterns your brain rehearses because it learned, somewhere along the line, that worrying kept you alert, or that self-criticism made you try harder, or that bracing for the worst protected you from disappointment, even if that protection came with a cost. The skill isn't in avoiding negative thoughts, that's impossible. The skill is in recognizing them while they're happening, not after they've ruined your day, not after they've kept you awake all night, but in the moment while they're still forming. You catch the voice that says, "I'm going to embarrass myself," and replace it with, "Even if I do, it won't define me." You hear, "They're ignoring me because I'm boring," and reframe it as, "I'm not responsible for every silence." You hear, "I'll never get this right," and remind yourself, "I've gotten better before, I can again." It's not fake positivity, it's accurate perspective, the kind that says this is just a thought, not a prophecy, not a curse, not a signal to shut down. And the more you practice this, the more distance you build between the thought and the identity, between what your mind says and what you choose to believe. You can't stop every thought, but you can stop following the ones that lead you nowhere. You can hear them and say, "Not this time, not my truth, not where I'm going." You get to choose what voice becomes your narrator. Take a look around you, not just physically, but emotionally, socially, digitally, the people you spend time with, the voices you let into your mind, the stories you replay through your conversations, the tone of your group chats, the energy of your relationships, the way someone's presence leaves you feeling more drained or more alive. It's easy to underestimate the power of your environment because no one moment feels significant, no one interaction seems like a turning point. But over time, the people you spend the most time with start to shape how you see yourself, what you believe is possible, how high you aim, how often you doubt, how you speak to yourself in silence. Some people are like mirrors that make you look smaller, constantly minimizing your ideas, making fun of your growth, dismissing your efforts, calling your seriousness cringe or your ambition too much. Some people are like amplifiers of your worst habits, reinforcing your excuses, laughing off your patterns, making it harder to change because they're still benefiting from the old version of you. But some people, even just a few, are like oxygen, like sunlight, like momentum, the ones who listen without fixing, who challenge you without shaming, who ask you what you really want and don't let you deflect with sarcasm or comfort zones. Surrounding yourself with positive influences doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It means becoming intentional, noticing how people make you feel, not in one moment, but in patterns, in how often you feel safe being fully honest, how often you leave conversations feeling clearer, how often someone's example makes you want to be better. You don't need 100 cheerleaders, you need 2 or 3 real ones, people who know what you're capable of, even when you forget. People who reflect your potential back at you when your self-talk turns to static. And sometimes, being your own positive influence is the first step, being the kind of presence for yourself that you've always wanted from others. Create the environment that helps you grow, not the one that makes staying stuck feel comfortable. You wake up, open your phone, scroll past a war, a scandal, a disaster, a tweet storm, a video of someone screaming, someone suffering, someone selling rage in high definition. And before you've even had your first glass of water, your nervous system has already absorbed 3 doses of fear, 5 of outrage, and a low-grade anxiety that never quite goes away. We live in an attention economy, and negativity sells. Algorithms don't care about your peace of mind. They care about engagement, and fear is sticky. Anger is viral, outrage is profitable. It's not that these events don't matter, many of them do, but the question isn't should you care. The question is how much of your daily attention are you handing over to things you can't control, things that drain you, things that offer you no clear path to act, only to watch, react, and stay anxious. You tell yourself you're staying informed, but what you're actually doing is rehearsing helplessness, watching a world you can't touch, feeding your brain a steady diet of worst-case scenarios, and then wondering why you feel numb, restless, or hopeless. There's a difference between being aware and being consumed, between knowing and drowning. Limit doesn't mean ignore, it means choose when to check the news, choose how long to scroll, choose which voices get your trust, and most importantly, choose to protect your attention like it's your most valuable asset, because it is. Your attention determines your mood, your focus, your energy, your mental health. And if you give it away to negativity all day long, don't be surprised when your sense of possibility shrinks with it. You don't have to watch every train wreck in real time. You don't have to turn your piece into a screen for someone else's chaos. You can still care deeply about the world while choosing not to feed on its worst headlines. You're in the middle of a setback, a mistake, a bad day, a hard week. Maybe something didn't go as planned. Maybe someone let you down, or maybe it's your own pattern repeating again. And your mind starts doing what it's trained to do, replaying the problem, dissecting what went wrong, obsessing over whose fault it is, what you should have done differently, how everything always ends up like this. And it's comforting in a strange way, because as long as you're thinking about the problem, you feel like you're doing something, but you're not. You're stuck in the loop. Because problems are loud, they demand attention, they justify worry, they give your mind something to circle around like a drain. But solutions are quiet, calm, and forward-facing. They ask you to shift your posture from complaining to changing, from rumination to direction. And that shift is uncomfortable if you've built your identity around reacting. Focusing on the solution doesn't mean pretending everything's fine. It means accepting the reality without getting swallowed by it. It means asking yourself questions that actually move you. What's the next best action I can take? What part of this is still within my control? What lesson am I being forced to learn right now? It means choosing to spend more time in motion than in loops. It means giving your energy to what now instead of why me, and even if that action is small. An email, a conversation, a decision, a boundary, it's still a pivot. Because the people who grow are not the ones with fewer problems. They're the ones with stronger response patterns, the ones who don't feed the fire just to feel something. You get to decide whether you stay in the orbit of the problem or step into the path of the solution. You won't always feel ready, but solutions don't wait for readiness, they wait for movement. You're in a new job, a new relationship, a new project, a new friendship, and things feel smooth at first. Everyone's being nice, cooperative, flexible, but underneath the surface, you assume they know what you mean, and they assume you know what they expect, and no one wants to seem difficult, so no one says the hard parts out loud. And then weeks pass, and things start to feel off. Someone's frustrated but doesn't say it. Someone keeps crossing a boundary that was never clearly stated. Someone delivers something you didn't ask for, or expects something you never promised, and suddenly you're not just managing the task, you're managing miscommunication. This happens in all areas of life. Relationships fall apart not because of bad intentions, but because no one was clear in the beginning. Teams underperform not because of laziness, but because roles and outcomes were vague. Friendships fade not because of betrayal, but because needs weren't named. Clarifying expectations sounds simple, but it requires courage, the courage to be specific, to risk being seen as rigid, to ask questions that feel too direct, to say things like, "What does success look like to you? What are you hoping I'll do? What's not okay with you?" It means front-loading the discomfort so you don't pay the price later. It means replacing assumption with articulation, and realizing that clarity isn't rude, it's a form of respect. You don't have to read minds or let people guess yours. Set the terms early, revisit them often, adjust them if needed. Because most conflict isn't about who's right, it's about who expected what and never said it. Imagine you're in an argument, not screaming, just tense. You feel your body tightening, your voice changing, your chest getting hotter, and your brain starts narrowing in fight or flee, defend or withdraw, and every word you want to say feels urgent, justified. Now imagine you pause, not for long, just enough to ask yourself, why am I really reacting like this? What part of me feels threatened? What does this moment remind me of? And in that pause, you begin to see the gap between what's happening and how you're interpreting it. That gap is emotional intelligence. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending to be calm. It's about understanding your emotions, seeing them not as enemies, but as messengers, clues, signals that tell you something about your needs, your past, your values, your fears. And it doesn't stop with you, it extends to others. It's the ability to recognize when someone's anger is really grief, when someone's coldness is fear, when someone's criticism is self-projection. It means listening not just to words, but to tone, to silence, to pattern. It means staying in the moment when everything in you wants to escalate or shut down. Emotional intelligence is a skill, and like all skills, it's built through practice, through reflection, through failing and trying again. You build it by noticing your triggers, by repairing instead of retaliating, by learning the emotional language that lets you name what you feel without exploding or imploding. Because how you respond in emotionally charged moments determines more than your relationships, it defines your character, your growth, your inner peace. You can be brilliant, capable, successful, but without emotional intelligence, your life will always feel volatile. Learn to understand your feelings, and you'll finally feel in control, not of others, but of yourself. You've made a mistake, maybe it's visible, maybe it's private, but it hits you in the gut. That old familiar voice comes up again, the one that says, "See, you're not good at this," or "You always mess things up," or "You're just not cut out for it." And before you even realize it, you're stepping back, shrinking, editing yourself out of your own potential because somewhere deep inside, you believe that your abilities are fixed, that who you are is already defined. And that failure is a reflection of your identity instead of your process. This is the trap of the fixed mindset, the belief that you either have it or you don't, that effort is a sign of inadequacy, that struggling means something is wrong with you. But there's another way to see it. What if every mistake is just data, every setback just information, every failure just a rough draft of progress? A growth mindset doesn't make the pain go away, it reframes it. It tells you that intelligence, talent, skill, confidence, all of it is trainable, flexible, responsive to input. It allows you to look at something you're bad at and say, "Not yet," instead of "never." It makes effort a sign of strength, not shame. And most importantly, it rewires your relationship to discomfort, because instead of avoiding it, you move toward it, knowing that resistance is the very signal that you're stretching into new ground. You stop measuring your worth by your results and start measuring your life by your willingness to keep growing. Because people who achieve incredible things don't get there by always being the best, they get there by outlasting their own doubt. And you can too if you just shift from "I'm not good at this" to "I'm not good at this yet." That one word might change everything. Think of the last time you agreed to something you didn't want. Maybe it was a price, a deadline, a favor, a shift in plans, and you told yourself it's not worth the conflict. It's not that big a deal, but afterward, you felt resentful, drained, maybe even a little invisible. Because whether you noticed it or not, you just went through a negotiation and lost. Most people think negotiation is only for contracts, business deals, formal meetings, but the truth is, every day is a negotiation. You negotiate with friends, with partners, with clients, with family, with yourself. The difference is whether you do it consciously or by default. Learning to negotiate well isn't about being aggressive or manipulative. It's about being clear on what matters to you, listening deeply to what the other side values, and working to find a structure that honors both. It starts by understanding your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In simple terms, what happens if this deal doesn't happen? That knowledge gives you power because it means you're not trapped. From there, it's about asking the right questions, not assuming the other person's position is fixed, but exploring what flexibility exists beneath the surface. What would make this work for both of us? What's most important to you here? What are you afraid of losing? The strongest negotiators aren't those who dominate, but those who stay calm, curious, and patient. They know when to walk away, when to wait, and when to compromise without sacrificing core needs. Because at the heart of every negotiation is this question: can we create something better together than we could apart? And when you learn how to have that conversation, you stop being passive in your life. You stop silently agreeing to terms that don't serve you. And you start designing outcomes that reflect what you actually value. You wake up to a full inbox buzzing notifications, a dozen micro-demands screaming for your attention. Everything feels urgent, everything feels now, and without even realizing it, your whole day becomes reactive, responding to what yells the loudest, fixing fires, chasing deadlines, clearing clutter. But by the end of the day, something feels off. You were busy, maybe even productive, but not fulfilled. Because deep down, you didn't touch the important work, the silent work, the slow work, the foundational work that doesn't beg for attention but quietly shapes your future. This is the urgency trap. It tricks you into believing that activity equals progress. But not all tasks are equal. Some things matter more not because they're loud, but because they're lasting. Important tasks are the ones that build your health, your skills, your relationships, your long-term vision. They often require planning, patience, focus, and because they don't scream, they get postponed, ignored, replaced. Until one day you look up and realize you've been running in circles. Prioritizing based on importance means asking yourself hard questions. What will still matter in 5 years? What would I regret not doing if I had less time? What task today is most aligned with who I want to become? It means learning to say no to urgency theater. It means choosing deep work over shallow wins. It means scheduling what matters before responding to what demands. Because your life is not a to-do list, it's a reflection of what you consistently choose to invest in. And when you start prioritizing importance, you stop living at the mercy of noise. You start creating meaning instead of just maintaining motion. You wake up and the first thing you remember is what you forgot to do yesterday, maybe a message you didn't send, maybe something you said wrong in front of someone you wanted to impress, or maybe just a moment where you felt slow, clumsy, not good enough. And before you even brush your teeth, your mind has already started speaking, not in full sentences, but in patterns you know by heart. What's wrong with you? Why can't you ever get it together? Why are you like this? And you don't even fight it anymore. Because you're used to it, and that's the part that should scare you, the fact that you're used to waking up into your own hostility, that you live inside a system where you're both the accused and the accuser, where no one else has to hurt you because you've learned to hurt yourself better than anyone else could. The reason most people stay stuck isn't lack of ambition. It's because they live with an inner voice that cancels every effort before it starts. And what's worse is that they call it realism. They think they're being honest, when in fact they're just repeating criticism they never deserved. Things they heard from parents, teachers, people who didn't know how to guide without shaming. And now that voice is automated, baked into their decision-making. Into how they speak to themselves in the quiet moments when no one's watching. And so even when they do something good, they minimize it, and when they mess up, they magnify it, and this is how confidence gets eaten from the inside out. You see it most clearly when something small happens, like making a typo, forgetting your keys, getting rejected, and instead of thinking this happens, you think this is who I am. And that leap from action to identity, from mistake to self-hatred, is where the damage grows because now your brain doesn't treat events like moments, it treats them like proof, and your entire sense of self becomes a court case against yourself, with no defense attorney in sight. But here's the thing, your body listens to every word your mind says, and if your self-talk is laced with disgust, your body will tense, shrink, tire, because it believes you're in danger, not from the world, but from you, and this creates a kind of exhaustion that no sleep can fix, a constant low-grade fear of being judged by yourself. So what if, just as an experiment, you started noticing that voice and interrupting it, not with fake positivity, not by pretending everything is fine, but just by refusing to pile on? What if instead of saying, "I'm such a loser," you said, "That was hard"? What if instead of "I ruin everything," you said, "I'm still learning"? What if instead of "I hate myself," you said nothing at all and just took a breath and let the moment pass without adding more weight to it? Changing how you talk to yourself won't make you perfect, but it will make you possible, and that's everything, because the people who move forward in life aren't always the smartest or strongest. They're the ones who didn't drown in their own criticism, the ones who learned to have their own back. So just think, if your inner voice were recorded and played aloud, would you be proud of how you speak to yourself, or horrified? And if the answer is the second one, maybe it's time to re-record the script. You're sitting across from someone who once made you feel seen, maybe a friend, maybe a family member, and you're mid-sentence, trying to share something that matters to you. When they interrupt, they take the idea, twist it into something shallow, then toss it aside with a half smile. Maybe they even say something like, "That's kind of stupid though, isn't it?" And you laugh, you nod, you let it slide, and you finish the drink while pretending not to care. And then when it's over and you walk home in silence, the question returns, why do I feel smaller around them, and why do I never say anything? That's what happens when you don't have boundaries in your body, when saying no isn't in your system, not just no to actions, but no to disrespect, no to the way people talk to you, no to being treated like your words don't land, and no to that hollow feeling you get when you abandon yourself just to keep things smooth. Most people don't even realize how many times they disappear in the name of being agreeable. They don't hear the word yes as betrayal because it's wrapped in politeness, in peacekeeping, in "let's just get through this." But the body knows, resentment builds, you start feeling heavy after every social interaction, and then you blame yourself for being too sensitive. It shows up everywhere: at work when someone drops a task on you that was never yours, a last-minute email, a forgotten report, something they should have done but didn't, and they say it like it's nothing, "Could you just?" And you're already overwhelmed, but your mouth says, "Yeah, no problem," and you even smile while saying it, not because you want to help, but because you've been trained to value smoothness over truth. Or in relationships, when someone plans your time without asking, tells you where you're going, what time you're leaving, how long you'll stay, and instead of saying, "That doesn't work for me," you say, "Cool," and follow along. And your mind counts the hours while your voice counts the moments it didn't show up. The longer you live like this, the more you start losing shape, not because people don't respect you, but because you haven't given them a reason to, and you can't expect others to honor boundaries you never state or defend edges you never define. Saying no isn't rude, it's honest, and it's not about pushing people away. It's about letting them meet the real you, the one who doesn't bend out of fear, the one who doesn't default to okay just because silence is awkward, and if people can't handle your boundaries, they were never handling you, just your compliance. So think about it, what would your life feel like if, every time someone crossed a line, you didn't pretend they didn't? If instead of smoothing the tension, you let it breathe, let the silence speak, let your no stand on its own? You don't owe anyone a softened version of your truth, and the sooner you stop flinching at your own edge, the sooner others will stop stepping over it. It's late at night and you're replaying a moment you wish you could undo. Maybe you snapped at someone. Maybe you failed at something important. Maybe you just wasted an entire day scrolling and now you're filled with that thick, heavy self-disgust. The kind that doesn't just live in your mind, but in your chest, your stomach, your spine, and your instinct isn't to soothe yourself, it's to punish, to replay it over and over like that's going to fix it. And in your head, you call this responsibility. You tell yourself this is how growth works, by feeling bad enough to never do it again. But shame doesn't change people, it only hides them, and the more you shame yourself, the more likely you are to repeat the same pattern, not because you're lazy or bad or broken, but because shame freezes the nervous system, and frozen people don't make bold choices. They make safe ones, avoidant ones, ones that keep them stuck. Self-compassion is not about excuses, it's about momentum. It says, yes, you made a mistake, but that doesn't make you a mistake. Yes, you handled that wrong, but you're still someone who tries. Yes, today got away from you, but tomorrow is not canceled just because of that. Most people think self-compassion is some soft, indulgent thing, but it's not. It's the only way you can look at your mess and not fall apart. It's the only way you can learn without drowning in self-hate, and without it, you become someone who's afraid of their own reflection, who can't forgive, who can't grow, who's always carrying guilt instead of guidance. The next time you feel like you messed up, try this. Instead of spiraling, say one kind sentence to yourself, just one, even if it feels fake, even if you don't believe it yet, because kindness has to start somewhere, and if you've been living in self-rejection for years, one kind sentence is a revolution. Imagine how your life would feel if your first response to pain wasn't punishment, but presence, if you didn't run from your mistakes, but stayed long enough to understand them, if you treated yourself like someone worth protecting, not someone to be constantly disciplined. Because the truth is, growth doesn't come from judgment. It comes from feeling safe enough to try again, and that safety has to start with you. So next time you're disappointed in yourself, don't double the damage by piling on. Just stop, breathe, and remember that the way you speak to yourself becomes the way you live with yourself, and you have to live here, so make it livable. You don't always notice it when it starts because it doesn't come with an announcement, it doesn't slam the door or shout into your ears, it creeps in quietly, through small discomforts you avoid, through small conflicts you let slide, through moments you hesitate to face the truth, and in those moments a part of you softens in the wrong direction, not in kindness but in avoidance, not in peace but in paralysis, and slowly, without deciding, you stop trusting yourself in discomfort. You stop trusting your own ability to endure, to respond, to stay calm when things break, and that's where the erosion begins, not in failure, but in the refusal to even stand in the wind. Resilience isn't a shield you put on when life is hard, it's something you build in the silence between storms, when no one is watching, when things are just slightly uncomfortable, and you choose to stay there a little longer instead of retreating. It's built when your plans fall apart, and you refuse to collapse with them, when people misjudge you, and you don't contort your identity to please them, when a task feels too big, and you start anyway, one piece at a time, without waiting for courage to show up in advance. Mental resilience is not bravado, it's not pretending to be unbothered, it's knowing that pain doesn't mean failure, that doubt doesn't mean you're not ready, that pressure doesn't mean you break, it just means something matters and your body is reminding you. Most people think resilient people are born strong, but they're not. They've just stopped negotiating with fear, they've stopped running from the unknown, they've stopped letting emotion decide their next move. And maybe you've never practiced this, maybe every wave has knocked you down, maybe your first instinct is still to hide when things get heavy, but that can change. You can start by noticing the smallest thing you want to avoid: a difficult conversation, a hard task, a lingering insecurity, and doing one small action anyway, one step without waiting to feel ready. That is where the wall starts to rebuild, not in heroism, in quiet repetition. And if you can learn that discomfort is a sign of engagement, not defeat, that pressure is not a signal to run but a reason to breathe and move through, then slowly, without fanfare, your nervous system becomes your ally, your mind stops flinching, and your backbone returns. Not because life got easier, but because you did not surrender. There's a moment right after it lands: the words, the tone, the look, the feeling that someone saw you and decided you were lacking. And in that moment, your stomach tightens, your chest flares up, your face might burn a little, and something in your brain screams for defense, for justification, for withdrawal, and that's the fork in the road, that instant where you decide whether criticism becomes injury or insight. Most people go left: they justify, they argue, they turn inward, they rehearse revenge fantasies, or worse, they shrink and absorb it into their self-worth, letting the comment mutate into something bigger, louder, meaner than it ever was. But there's another path, quieter, harder, slower, and it starts with doing nothing, with letting the words echo without reacting, with allowing the sting to pass without moving to fix it or erase it. Because here's the truth: not all criticism is truth, but all criticism is information, and the more you can separate who you are from what is said about you, the more you can treat every critique like a flashlight, not a dagger. Learning to handle criticism isn't about growing a thick skin, it's about developing a deeper center, one that doesn't crack every time someone disapproves, one that doesn't rely on constant praise to function, one that can sort signal from noise without emotional chaos. It means asking yourself, is this true? Is this useful? Is this delivered in good faith? And even if it's not, is there something in it worth learning? And if the answer is yes, then the next step is the hardest: to absorb it without shame, to make a change without self-attack, to get better without needing to hate the version of you that didn't know better. Because real maturity isn't becoming untouchable, it's becoming open without falling apart. And if you can stop making every critique personal, if you can look at someone's feedback and respond with curiosity instead of injury, then you gain something rare: a self that isn't fragile, a mind that isn't defensive, a life that keeps evolving not in spite of discomfort, but because of it. You think you're just tired or irritable or distracted or in need of a break, but what's actually happening is something deeper: unprocessed stress accumulating in your body, piling up quietly in your shoulders, your gut, your breath, your sleep, and every day you push through it, every time you ignore the signs, the backlog grows. Stress doesn't disappear just because you survive the day, it stays until you address it, until you give it an exit. That's what most people never learn: that stress is not just emotional or mental, it's physical, and unless you let it move through your system, it stays trapped, morphing into fatigue, anxiety, irritability, or even illness. Processing stress isn't about escape, it's about completion. It means recognizing the signal and taking it seriously, not by numbing it with distractions or silencing it with productivity, but by letting your body do what it was built to do: release. Sometimes that means walking without purpose until your thoughts slow down. Sometimes it means breathing in patterns that reset your nervous system. Sometimes it means crying, not because you're weak, but because you're metabolizing intensity, letting your biology catch up to your psychology. And sometimes it means naming exactly what's wrong, not vaguely saying you're stressed, but identifying the source, the thought loop, the unresolved tension, and speaking it aloud or writing it down. Because stress thrives in silence. Amplifies when ignored, but when it's given space to move, it loses its grip. You have to stop thinking of stress as a sign of failure or imbalance and start seeing it as part of the energy cycle. What builds must be released, what tenses must be unraveled, what pressures must be named before they can be changed. So don't wait until your body forces you to stop. Build a system, move daily, breathe deeply, reflect honestly, choose one small technique and do it until it becomes second nature. Because when you process your stress regularly, you stop living in reaction and you start living in rhythm. Most people don't realize how much energy they waste avoiding conflict, how much resentment they store just to keep the peace, how many things they pretend not to notice because speaking up feels like starting a war, and over time that silence becomes a habit, and that habit becomes your identity: someone agreeable, someone nice, someone who smiles while swallowing discomfort, and by the time you realize you're tired all the time, it's not because you're doing too much, but because you're carrying conversations that should have ended, agreements you never actually made, and tension that was never named out loud. Conflict resolution isn't about becoming aggressive or confrontational. It's about having the courage to stay in discomfort long enough to name what matters, And it starts small, not with the big arguments or the dramatic showdowns, but with the moment someone interrupts you for the fifth time and you say, "I wasn't finished," or when someone assumes your time and you respond with, "I didn't agree to that," not in anger, not to win, but to anchor reality. Because healthy conflict isn't about being right, it's about restoring clarity, it's about saying, "This is my boundary," and holding it when the other person pushes back. And yes, they will push back, they might say you're overreacting or difficult or selfish, but that's not your problem to fix, that's the price of honesty in a world addicted to smoothness. And if you can sit through that discomfort, not justify, not collapse, not explode, just stay centered, you start to earn a life where peace isn't fake. It's real, it's earned, because it's not built on suppression but on structure. Learning to resolve conflict isn't about changing other people, it's about becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves for convenience, who doesn't need to be liked to speak the truth, and once you practice that even just once, the next conversation feels a little lighter, and the next boundary a little firmer, until you're no longer surviving tension, you're transforming it. There's a moment, fast and almost invisible, when something small happens, a phrase, a tone, a glance, and suddenly you're not in the present anymore, your chest tightens, your jaw locks, your thoughts start racing or go completely blank. And if you don't catch it, if you don't pause right there, the trigger hijacks your whole nervous system, and you start reacting not to the situation, but to the story it awakened in you. Maybe it's a memory of being ignored, maybe it's a fear of rejection, maybe it's the way your voice was once silenced, and now anything that even slightly resembles it feels like a threat. And instead of asking yourself what's true right now, you default to defense, you shut down, you lash out, or you disappear emotionally while pretending to engage. Recognizing your triggers isn't about blame, it's about pattern recognition. It's about learning the blueprint of your emotional wiring so you stop letting past pain dictate present choices. And this requires brutal honesty, not just about what hurts, but about what you do to avoid feeling it. Do you people please to avoid conflict? Do you get sarcastic to mask vulnerability? Do you retreat into silence when your needs aren't met instead of naming them? Every reaction holds a clue, and the more you trace it back, not just what you felt but when it started, the more you realize you've been carrying unexamined stories in your nervous system for years. Healing a trigger doesn't mean it disappears forever, it means it stops controlling you, it means you can feel the wave rising and choose not to surf it, you can feel the anger but not weaponize it, you can feel the sadness but not become it. And that's what makes you emotionally strong, not being immune to pain, but being able to sit with it without becoming destructive. The more you know what touches your core, the more you're able to protect it with clarity instead of chaos, and the less life becomes a reaction and more a conscious response. You wake up, you go through your routine, you do the things expected of you, and by the end of the day you feel productive, maybe even successful, but also strangely disconnected. Like you moved through a script that wasn't really yours, like you performed your life instead of lived it, and this feeling doesn't always scream, sometimes it just hums quietly beneath your joy, making even the good days feel slightly hollow. That's the cost of not knowing your values, not the abstract ones you wrote in a journal once, but the real ones, the ones that shape your choices, the ones that decide how you spend your time, your money, your energy, the ones you're willing to defend even when it's inconvenient. Most people live reactively, chasing what looks good, what pleases others, what avoids discomfort, and they don't realize they've built a life full of things they don't actually care about, jobs they tolerate, relationships they shrink in, goals they outgrew, all because they never paused long enough to ask, what really matters to me and why? Connecting with your values is like building a compass. It doesn't make decisions for you, but it keeps you from getting lost. It means asking yourself what you want your life to stand for, not someday, but now. Do you value honesty but lie to keep the peace? Do you value freedom but overcommit constantly? Do you value growth but numb your discomfort instead of facing it? The misalignment shows up in restlessness, in burnout, in self-doubt, because deep down your body knows you're out of sync. But when you begin to act in alignment, when you say no to something because it doesn't match who you want to be, when you choose the harder path because it's the one that's true, something changes. You feel more whole, not because life got easier, but because your choices stop costing you your self-respect. That's how you find clarity in chaos, not by doing more, but by doing what matters. You're standing in a long line at the store, someone ahead of you is complaining loudly, your phone is buzzing, your mind starts drifting to unfinished tasks, a past argument, a future worry, and before you even realize it, your body is tense, your breath is shallow, and your attention is gone, not stolen, but surrendered piece by piece to everything except the moment you're actually in. This is what most days feel like for people who never learned detachment, who believe every thought needs engagement, every emotion needs explanation, every irritation deserves a reaction, and yet the more you chase control, the more you feel controlled. Mindfulness isn't about silencing the mind, it's about noticing it without being swallowed, it's about hearing the noise but not identifying with it, about creating just enough distance to remember. Not every thought is true, not every emotion is urgent, not every discomfort is a problem. Detachment doesn't mean apathy, it means you're no longer emotionally hijacked by every inconvenience, you don't spiral into rage because someone cut you off, you don't rehearse arguments that never happened, you don't tie your peace to whether things go your way. Instead, you breathe, you notice, you come back again and again. You watch your thoughts like clouds, your emotions like waves, passing, shifting, never permanent. And the more you practice this, the less life feels like a storm to survive and more like weather to observe. The power of mindfulness isn't in escaping reality, it's in meeting it fully without drowning. The more you stay aware, the less you react blindly, the more you respond wisely. And detachment gives you space between stimulus and response, between impulse and action, space to choose who you want to be even when things go wrong, because they will. But now you'll know how to stay steady. You've probably done this before, made a to-do list that was longer than your patience, set a goal so big it felt exciting until it became paralyzing, imagined a version of yourself that was so perfect it became impossible to begin, and then called yourself lazy when you fell short. But the truth is, most people don't fail because they lack ambition, they fail because they lack a system that respects their reality. Real change happens when goals stop being dreams and start becoming directions. And it starts small, not with 10-year plans, but with one clear next step, something that fits inside your current energy, your current schedule, your current capacity. Setting realistic goals doesn't mean lowering your standards, it means removing the fantasy of sudden transformation and building the kind of structure that leads to real momentum. It means understanding that consistency beats intensity, that 15 minutes a day done repeatedly is worth more than a 5-hour sprint followed by burnout. It means asking not just, what do I want to achieve, but what am I willing to sustain? What trade-offs am I prepared to accept? What system will keep me moving when motivation fails? Because it will. Motivation fades, plans fall apart, moods fluctuate, and unless your goals are grounded in your actual life, not your ideal one, they'll collapse the first time things get hard. But when you learn to design goals that stretch you just enough without breaking you, something shifts, progress becomes part of your day, not a distant reward, and success becomes measurable, not mythical. And maybe the biggest shift isn't even in the results, but in how you start to see yourself, not as someone who keeps failing to start, but as someone who keeps showing up. That's what builds self-trust. That's what builds discipline. That's what makes the future possible. You keep repeating the same mistake, getting close to the wrong kind of person, saying yes when you want to say no, pushing yourself to exhaustion, then wondering why everything feels out of control, and the answer isn't out there, not in the next book or podcast or affirmation, because the real answer is already inside you, buried under distractions, waiting to be heard. Introspection is the art of listening to your own life. It's the decision to turn inward not for blame, but for understanding, to pause long enough to ask, what pattern is playing out again? What part of me is afraid right now? Where did I learn to tolerate this? Most people avoid introspection because it's uncomfortable. It makes you confront your role in the pain, your part in the chaos, your own resistance to change, but that's also where transformation begins. You can't fix what you won't face. And introspection isn't just sitting with your thoughts, it's questioning them, tracing them back, finding the root behind the reaction, the wound behind the defense, the need behind the behavior. It's journaling not what happened, but how it felt. It's reflecting not just on what you did, but why you did it. It's noticing the tension in your body when you lie to keep the peace. It's realizing that anger is often fear in armor, that control is often a response to chaos. That perfectionism is often shame with good posture. The more you practice this kind of self-awareness, the more you start to live awake. You begin to see choices where you once saw inevitability. You start to pause before repeating a cycle. You start to respond from clarity, not conditioning. And maybe most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself. Because now you see yourself fully, clearly, and from that place, growth isn't a performance, it's a return. You wake up, the same bed, the same room, the same thoughts already pulling you into a list of problems, frustrations, deadlines, things that aren't working, things that still need to be fixed, and you don't even realize it, but your mind is scanning for lack, your body tightening with stress before the day even begins. Most people live like this, waiting for something extraordinary to feel thankful, waiting for life to calm down before they start appreciating it, waiting for the perfect moment before saying, this is enough. But the truth is, gratitude isn't a reaction to good things, it's a skill that changes how you see everything. And when you build that skill, something shifts, not in the world, but in your perception of it. Daily gratitude doesn't require grand moments. It's the taste of hot coffee, the sound of rain on the window, the fact that your lungs are still working without permission. It's remembering that not every ache is a tragedy, that having someone to call is a privilege, that boredom means peace, that routine means stability. And when you train your mind to notice those things, to name them, to feel them, to anchor yourself in them, you start building resilience. Because you're not just surviving the day, you're collecting evidence that it's already full. And no, this doesn't mean ignoring pain or pretending everything's fine. It means holding both the difficulty and the beauty in the same breath. It means saying, yes, this hurts, and yes, I'm still thankful. The more you practice this, the more your nervous system learns calm, the more your mind stops chasing what's missing, the more you begin to feel like life is something you're in, not something you're behind on. So start simple. End your day by writing 3 things that felt good, no matter how small. Do it again tomorrow. Watch how the world doesn't change, but you do. You're with someone who always has a way of making you feel smaller, not directly, not through obvious insults, but through comments that carry a weight you can't explain, the subtle dismissal, the passive judgment, the way they talk over you or around you or through you until you start questioning whether you're imagining it. That's how toxic people work. Not like villains in a movie, but like erosion, slow, persistent, hard to prove but impossible to ignore. And most people don't walk away at first, not because they don't notice, but because they doubt themselves, because the toxicity hides behind charm or shared history or moments that feel good just long enough to justify staying. But over time, your body keeps score. You feel more anxious around them, more drained after seeing them, more confused, more tense, less like yourself. If you're someone who's used to peacekeeping, someone who avoids conflict, someone who's been taught to give people the benefit of the doubt no matter what, you'll tolerate way too much. You'll rationalize their moods, you'll excuse their tone, you'll carry the weight of their dysfunction on your back and call it compassion. But it's not compassion to let yourself be used, and it's not rude to leave. Learning to avoid toxic people isn't about judging them, it's about protecting the part of you that still wants to grow. It's about realizing that no matter how strong your mindset is, your environment still shapes you. And being around people who belittle, manipulate, gossip, or drain you will eventually pull you back into a version of yourself you worked hard to outgrow. So pay attention to how you feel after each interaction. Take that feeling seriously. Walk away when your nervous system begs you to. And remember, peace isn't found in fixing others, it's found in the spaces where you no longer have to. You're trying to write an email while answering a message, while reheating your coffee, while remembering you forgot to reply to that one person, while noticing your brain is now fractured into 5 directions and none of them feel clear. That's what modern life looks like for most people, not multitasking, but constant task switching, pretending it's efficient while your attention shatters into pieces too small to use. The problem isn't that you're doing too much, it's that you're trying to do it all at once, without rhythm, without a system, without boundaries. Real multitasking isn't about doing everything simultaneously, it's about knowing when to group similar tasks, when to shift gears, when to batch distractions instead of letting them bleed into every moment. It's answering all messages in one block instead of checking every 5 minutes. It's setting a timer for deep focus work, then rewarding yourself with something easier. It's understanding that your brain is capable of more, but only when you give it structure. Most people think they're bad at focus, but what they're really missing is sequencing. You can't expect yourself to perform well when your notifications never stop, when your environment is chaotic, when your priorities keep shifting mid-task. So build a flow that works with your mind, not against it. Use techniques like the Pomodoro method, time blocking, or task stacking, anything that helps you move smoothly from one focus to the next. And don't glorify busyness, because being active and being productive are not the same. What matters isn't how many tabs are open, but how many you can actually close. And every time you choose single tasking over scattered attention, you're not just finishing more, you're feeling less exhausted while doing it. That's not just better work, that's a better life. You spend your day in a loop of inputs, news, emails, tasks, scrolling, reacting, absorbing, and by the time the evening comes, your brain is tired but restless, your body is still tense, and nothing really feels like a break. You try to rest, but resting starts to feel like wasting time. So you open another app, watch another show, check another update, hoping to feel relaxed, but feeling only more overloaded. That's because most forms of modern rest are still passive consumption, not a release, not an outlet, not something that empties the nervous system, just something that dulls it. But creativity is different. When you make something, anything, you stop being a container for the world's noise and start becoming an expression of your own signal. You don't have to be good, you just have to engage. It could be writing a sentence, sketching something dumb, building a playlist, rearranging your desk, solving a puzzle, learning a chord, anything that creates instead of consumes. And in that shift, something happens. Your breathing slows, your brain waves change, your attention anchors. You lose track of time in a good way. You come out lighter, not because you avoided your problems, but because your system finally had a break from interpreting, reacting, and performing. This isn't just about hobbies. It's about regulation, a way to clear emotional static through action, a way to reset without numbing, a way to come back to yourself in a world that pulls you away. So next time you feel restless, don't reach for a screen, reach for something that involves your hands, your curiosity, your presence. That's what real relaxation looks like, not stopping everything, but doing something that brings you home to yourself. You avoid the call, you delay the message. You walk away from the difficult conversation, the awkward silence, the new challenge, the unknown path. And you tell yourself you'll do it later when you're more ready, when things settle, when you feel more confident, but the truth is you're waiting for comfort in a place that will never provide it. Growth never feels safe in the moment. It feels risky, uncertain, unnatural. That's why most people stop right before the moment they're about to expand. Discomfort is the entry point to every skill, every boundary, every upgrade in how you live. But we've been trained to see it as danger, as a sign to retreat, instead of what it really is, a signal that you've left the old story and are stepping into something real. You don't build confidence by preparing forever. You build it by moving through discomfort until it stops controlling you. And the more you practice this, the more you see it clearly. The difficult call is often the one that clears resentment. The awkward talk is the one that deepens respect. The challenge you've been dodging is the one that would have revealed your strength. Avoiding discomfort doesn't protect you, it traps you. It keeps you stuck in loops of quiet anxiety and unrealized potential. But when you accept that discomfort is part of the process, not a failure sign, you stop bracing against life and start engaging with it. And slowly your threshold rises. You get better at being present in tension. You learn to speak even when your voice shakes. You stop flinching from what matters. That's how power is built, not from ease, but from intimacy with what you used to avoid. Someone says something that irritates you, a tone that feels off, a word that triggers a memory, a reaction that feels too cold or too emotional. And without noticing, you start building a narrative. They're selfish, they're rude, they don't care. But you don't ask what kind of day they had. You don't see the weight behind their face. You don't know what fight they had this morning, or what grief they're hiding, or what insecurity made them say that thing in that way. Most people are not trying to hurt you, they're just leaking from wounds you can't see. And empathy doesn't mean excusing bad behavior, it means pausing the story you've built long enough to see the full picture. In every conversation you have two options: defend yourself or understand the other. One creates distance, the other builds connection. And it's not about being right, it's about being human. Because the more you practice empathy, the less personally you take things. You start seeing patterns, not just personalities. You realize the anger wasn't about you, the silence wasn't about you, the weird reaction wasn't about you. You stop being the center of every perceived offense and start becoming a calmer, clearer presence. That's not weakness, that's emotional strength. You still have boundaries, you still walk away when needed, but you don't attack people for their pain, you don't escalate misunderstanding into conflict, you just ask better questions. You listen without preparing your defense. You leave space for people to be messy. And in doing that, you create something rare, a conversation that heals instead of harms. You've been walking around with a quiet voice in your head that tells you who you are, what you're capable of, and what's simply not for you. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it just states calmly, convincingly that you're not the kind of person who could do that. That you're too late, too sensitive, not talented enough, not strong enough, not that type. And because it sounds familiar, because you've heard it for so long, you start mistaking it for truth. So you stop applying, you don't speak up, you avoid risk. You stay close to what's safe. And every time you do, the voice gets stronger, not because it was right, but because you didn't test it. Limiting beliefs aren't facts. They're conclusions you reached when you were too young, too scared, or too hurt to see the full picture. Maybe someone told you what you weren't and you believed them. Maybe you failed once and assumed that meant forever. Maybe you never even tried but still decided you couldn't. These beliefs aren't just thoughts, they become identities. And until you question them, they'll quietly shape every decision you make. So challenge them, notice them, name them, ask where they came from, ask if they're even yours. Then do one thing, just one, that contradicts them. Speak in the meeting. Submit the work, set the boundary. Say what you want, not what's expected. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to show your nervous system that survival doesn't mean shrinking. Every time you act against the old story, you weaken it. And over time, the voice that once sounded like truth will start sounding like what it really is: fear dressed as logic. That's how the narrative changes, not by shouting over the voice, but by slowly, consistently disproving it. You expect yourself to get it right the first time, to break the habit immediately, to wake up one day and just be better, more focused, more confident, more in control. And when that doesn't happen, you don't just feel frustrated, you feel ashamed, like you're failing some invisible test, like you're the only one still struggling with things that should have been solved by now. but healing isn't linear, growth isn't clean, and change, real nervous system deep change, takes more than motivation. It takes time, and more than anything, it takes patience. But patience with yourself isn't passive, it's not giving up, it's not letting everything slide, it's choosing to meet yourself in the middle of the mess without judgment. It's sitting in the relapse, the setback, the pause, and saying, "This doesn't erase me." When you practice patience, you don't lower your standards, you just stop attaching your worth to your pace. You stop measuring your value by your productivity. You stop comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. And in that shift, everything softens, the pressure lifts, the shame weakens. You begin to see the process for what it is, a long, uneven walk toward clarity, not a sprint to perfection. Patience isn't just kind, it's strategic. It keeps you in the game, it helps you bounce back, it lets you learn instead of spiral. And most importantly, it makes you safe to yourself, so you stop fighting your own mind every time you slip. So next time you want to quit because it's taking too long, pause and ask, what would happen if I stayed, even now? What would change if I gave myself the grace I've always given others? You get rejected, the message doesn't come, the plan falls apart, the meeting is awkward, the feedback stings. And your brain instantly starts writing the story, "I'm not good enough, this is always how it goes, I never get it right." It feels like truth because it fits your mood, your fear, your history. But just because it feels real doesn't mean it is real. That's where reframing comes in. It's not about lying to yourself, it's not about toxic positivity. It's about stopping the default story long enough to ask, is there another way to see this? Maybe the rejection was redirection. Maybe the silence had nothing to do with you. Maybe the mistake was a signal that you're trying, not failing. Reframing doesn't erase discomfort, it just gives it context. And with that context, your nervous system calms, your thinking clears, you regain choice. It's a way of shifting from victim mode to agency, not because the situation changes, but because your posture inside it does. You stop catastrophizing, you stop spiraling, you start asking better questions. What am I learning? What does this make possible? Where can I grow from here? And slowly you build a habit. Your brain learns that not every negative feeling needs a negative story, that not every dip in mood is a collapse of progress, that not every hard thing is evidence of defeat. Reframing won't fix everything, but it might save your momentum. And in a world built on pressure, that might be enough to keep going when everything tells you to stop. You wake up overwhelmed, a message from someone throws off your rhythm. You feel uneasy, maybe angry, maybe anxious. You replay the situation over and over in your head, wondering what it meant, how to respond, whether to say something or let it go. And the truth is, your brain is scanning for comfort, not clarity. It's trying to feel better, not make the right call. Most people live this way without realizing it, making choices based on moods, urges, spikes in adrenaline, fear of loss, craving for approval. You ghost people not because it's what you stand for, but because it's easier than explaining. You say yes because you don't want tension, not because you believe in what you're saying yes to. You lash out, then regret it, because in that moment the anger felt truer than your principles. But here's the cost: when your decisions follow your emotions, your identity becomes unstable. You can't trust yourself because who you are keeps shifting based on what you're feeling. That's where values come in. Values are stable, they don't depend on mood. They're your internal compass when everything else is chaos. And the shift happens the moment you pause before reacting and ask, what matters more here, the short-term relief of saying what I feel or the long-term alignment of saying what I believe? Maybe your value is respect or honesty or protecting your peace. Maybe it's freedom or kindness or courage. Whatever it is, when you choose based on that, not the emotion of the moment, you build something rare, integrity. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes it's harder, slower, less flashy, but it lasts. And the more you practice it, the less you need to second-guess your choices, because they're no longer coming from fear or impulse, they're coming from you. It starts small: a message you sent that didn't get a reply, a look someone gave you, a word that didn't land the way you meant. You replay it, then you analyze it, then you predict what it means for your future. One thought branches into 5, then into 50. You're no longer in the moment, you're in a mental simulation of everything that could go wrong. That's overthinking. And it's not just exhausting, it's addictive, because it gives you the illusion of control. If you think hard enough, you'll figure it out. If you find the perfect response, you won't get hurt. If you run every possible outcome, you'll be ready. But what actually happens is the opposite. You delay action, you lose sleep, you spiral. You miss real opportunities because you're still stuck inside a hypothetical. And worst of all, you become disconnected from reality. Most overthinkers don't realize they're not analyzing facts, they're reacting to fears. They confuse anxiety with logic. And the more they try to solve it by thinking more, the deeper they sink. So how do you stop? You don't have to silence your brain, just give it better instructions. Instead of asking, what if it goes wrong? Ask, what do I want to do right now? Instead of trying to predict their reaction, focus on your intention. Instead of trying to get it perfect, focus on getting it done. And if the thought loop keeps going, remind yourself thinking isn't solving. It's just something to do that feels like progress. Most of the time, what you need isn't more thought, it's a small action. Send the message, make the call, move your body, say what you mean. Let the moment happen without overmanaging it. Life unfolds in movement, not analysis. And your mind isn't your enemy, it just needs leadership. So lead it out of the loop, back into the now. Some days you wake up off. You can't name it exactly, it's just a heaviness, a fog, a weird tension in your chest. Maybe it's something real. Maybe it's just your brain trying to prepare you for disappointment before it even happens. You brush your teeth, you check your phone, you scroll for an hour, but nothing shakes it. That's when anchoring matters. Anchoring means using intentional sensory cues like movement, sound, scent, posture to shift your internal state. It's not a trick, it's not denial. It's training. Your nervous system responds to repetition. That's why certain songs make you feel powerful. That's why walking a specific route can clear your head. That's why sitting upright changes your alertness. Most people use anchors by accident. Coffee becomes the signal to start the day. A playlist becomes the soundtrack to focus. A hoodie becomes comfort. But what if you made it conscious? What if you designed your environment to support your best self, even when your mood does? You can use a specific song to cue calm, a wrist gesture to cue strength, a 5-minute walk to break spirals, a scent to reset your thoughts. When done regularly, these patterns become neural shortcuts, ways to access better versions of yourself on command. It won't solve every problem, but it will interrupt the spiral. And sometimes that's all you need. Anchoring doesn't replace deep emotional work, but it helps you get to it without drowning first. It gives your mind a signal: we've been here before and we've come through it. You don't have to wait for the mood to pass. You can participate in changing it, not by force, not by pretending, but by using what your body already understands: rhythm, repetition, and cues. That's not cheating, that's resilience. You probably don't notice it, but your brain is always begging for rhythm. Even when you say you're spontaneous, even when you claim you hate schedules, your nervous system is secretly looking for something predictable to hold on to, something stable that says, we're safe, we're in control, we're not just reacting. That's what a daily routine gives you: not just order, but stability in the chaos. And yet most people resist it. They tell themselves they're too creative, too busy, too distracted, too unpredictable. But what actually happens is that without a structure, they burn their energy on decisions that shouldn't even be decisions: when to eat, what to wear, when to start, when to stop, what matters most. So their willpower drains before the day even begins. But imagine waking up and knowing exactly what comes next. No negotiation, no debate, no mood check, you just start. That's not boring, that's freedom. Because it means you're not a slave to how you feel in the moment. You don't need to feel inspired to take action. You don't need motivation to show up. The rhythm carries you. And the irony is, the more stable your routine, the more space you have for creativity, spontaneity, freedom, because your brain isn't scrambling anymore. It can rest, it can focus, it can build. A strong routine doesn't have to be perfect or long or packed, it just has to be consistent. It could be waking up at the same time every day, moving your body before you look at your phone, taking 10 minutes to set your intention. It could be a quiet evening check-in, a journaling habit, a stretch before bed. Whatever it is, it's yours. And when it's yours, you start to feel like your life is too, because you're not just reacting to each day anymore. You're creating them one block at a time. You're talking to someone and the conversation is fine, polite, surface level. You both know the script. The jokes are safe, the stories are polished, the timing is smooth, but underneath it feels like nothing real is happening. You walk away and forget the whole exchange by the next day. That's because connection isn't built on smoothness, it's built on vulnerability. But not in the dramatic way people think, not trauma dumping, not emotional confessions to strangers, not oversharing for attention. True connection grows from micro-vulnerabilities, those small, subtle moments when you stop performing and just show up. When you admit you were nervous before the meeting, when you say you don't know the answer, when you mention that you felt overlooked but didn't want to seem dramatic, when your voice wavers a little and you don't hide it. These aren't weaknesses, they're bridges. They tell the other person, I'm real and I trust you enough to let you see it. And in most cases, that permission invites them to do the same. Suddenly, the conversation shifts, the mask softens. You're not just exchanging words, you're actually seeing each other. It's uncomfortable at first, you'll feel exposed, but over time it becomes natural. And the strange thing is, when you do it often enough, you become stronger, not weaker, because you're no longer terrified of being seen. You're no longer addicted to control. You're not constantly editing yourself to fit the moment. You just are, and that kind of presence is magnetic. People feel it, they remember it, they come back to it, because it's rare. Most people are stuck behind their own armor, waiting for someone else to go first. What if you were the one who did? You sit down to work, open your laptop, and within minutes you're checking emails, switching tabs, responding to messages, checking your phone, opening a new window just to check something real quick. 2 hours pass. You've been busy the whole time, but nothing deep got done. That's the cost of task switching. Every time you jump from one thing to another, your brain has to reorient. You lose time, focus bleeds out, and your day disappears into activity that doesn't move anything forward. That's where time blocking comes in. It's simple. Instead of working from a to-do list that never ends, you assign time to the things that matter most in blocks without interruption. You make the decision once: from 9 to 11 deep work, from 11 to 11:30 break, from 11:30 to 1 meetings, from 1 to 2 writing, and you stick to it like it's a meeting with your future, because it is. The beauty of time blocking isn't just productivity, it's relief. You stop making decisions all day, you stop negotiating with distraction, you stop working all the time but finishing nothing, and more importantly, you start owning your day instead of renting it out to other people's priorities. At first, it will feel rigid. You'll want to break it. You'll think, I work better when I feel like it. But the truth is, you don't need to feel like it. You need to start, and the block gives you permission. It turns vague intentions into clear structure. It says, from this time to this time, this is who I am, and the more you do it, the more powerful it becomes, because you're no longer just reacting to life. You're shaping it hour by hour, choice by choice. You picture it clearly in your mind, the thing you want to try, the project you've been thinking about, the conversation you know you need to have, the risk that keeps following you around in your thoughts, but the moment you move toward it, a heavy sensation pulls you back, not always loud, not always dramatic, but subtle and firm, a whisper that says, what if it goes wrong? What if you're not good enough? What if they laugh? What if you fall? And so you stay where it's safe, where things are familiar, where your potential can't be proven wrong because it's never tested in the first place. And days pass like that, then weeks, then sometimes years, until the discomfort of not trying begins to outweigh the fear of failure itself. But by then you're out of practice, out of momentum, and you start telling yourself you missed your window, you had your chance, and now it's too late. But the truth is, fear never leaves, not really. It doesn't disappear once you're ready, it disappears once you act despite it, once you stop giving it permission to decide who you get to become. And maybe you fail, maybe it doesn't work out, maybe people talk, maybe it's messy and awkward and doesn't go as planned, but even then, something crucial happens. You didn't die, your world didn't collapse, your identity didn't shatter, you just tried, and trying is a muscle, a mindset, a habit, and every time you use it, it gets easier because now you've trained your nervous system to survive imperfection. Now your fear has data to contradict itself. Now the risk isn't an unknown monster, it's something you've already lived through. And once you know that, you're dangerous, not because you'll always win, but because you're not paralyzed by the chance that you might not. And that's how people who do great things start. Not with certainty, not with guarantees, but with the quiet decision to do it anyway, even when fear is louder than logic, even when failure feels inevitable, even when the voice in your head says don't. And they do it anyway, so maybe the question isn't how to get rid of fear, but whether you're willing to move forward even while it walks beside you. You're stuck, you know what needs to be done. You've thought about it 100 times, maybe even written it down, broken it into steps, visualized the result, but nothing happens. The days pass and the inertia grows, and somewhere deep down you start believing maybe you're just lazy, or maybe you're not the kind of person who finishes things. But you're wrong, because motivation doesn't come from pressure, it comes from clarity. And when your brain sees a task as vague or disconnected from your actual future, it resists, it stalls. It protects you from investing energy into something that feels pointless or too far away. And that's where future pacing comes in, because it teaches your mind to emotionally link the action with the outcome, not in a distant, abstract way, but in a grounded, personal one. So instead of just saying, I should eat healthier, you close your eyes and imagine walking into your doctor's office next year and hearing that your blood pressure is normal again, or instead of saying, I need to start this project. You picture the email you'll send when it's done, the moment you hit publish, the feeling of pride in your chest, and this is the trick. Your brain doesn't just respond to information, it responds to emotionally charged visuals, and when you create those on purpose, you give your mind a reason to care. A reason to act now, not later, because suddenly it sees the reward, it feels the consequence of delay. It no longer sees the work as a chore, but as a bridge to a version of you that already exists in the future. And every time you act in alignment with that version, you feel a shift, not just productivity, but momentum. And once momentum begins, it becomes harder to stop than to continue, because now your actions aren't fueled by pressure but by vision. So next time you're stuck, don't try to push yourself with guilt or shame. Sit down, close your eyes, and ask, what will my life look like if I do this for the next 6 months? And what if I do? Let the answers hit you, let them shape your urgency, let them carry you forward. You hit a wall, something breaks, plans fall through, someone disappoints you, or maybe you disappoint yourself, and your first instinct is to resist, to complain, to ask why this always happens to you, to interpret the event as proof that you're failing or that life is unfair. But what if the moment you label something as bad is the same moment you rob yourself of its value, because challenges, real ones, frustrating ones, unfair ones, often carry the exact pressure needed to unlock your next evolution, not because suffering is noble, but because resistance builds strength, friction builds focus, and disruption forces reevaluation. And the people who seem unshaken by chaos aren't lucky, they're trained to reframe setbacks as signals, trained to ask, what is this here to teach me? Trained to see every failure as a message from reality, pointing them toward a smarter move, and this doesn't mean you need to enjoy the pain or pretend it doesn't suck. It just means you refuse to waste it, you refuse to let it be meaningless, you mine it for insight, you ask yourself, what am I learning about myself right now? What system needs updating? What boundary did I miss? And with every answer, the obstacle becomes smaller, not because the situation changed, but because your relationship to it did. And that's the reframe, not fake positivity, but intentional perspective, a mental pivot from reaction to reflection. And when you do this enough, your brain adapts, it stops panicking at every roadblock. It starts scanning for angles, for exits, for leverage, and life becomes less about what happens to you and more about what you do with it. Because now your challenges don't define your limits, they define your growth path, and when you internalize that, every hard moment becomes a chance to sharpen, to adjust, to rise, and eventually you stop fearing setbacks, not because they don't hurt, but because you trust yourself to build something with them. You wake up and your mind immediately jumps to the list, the undone tasks, the projects that feel too big, the deadlines you're already late on, and before your feet even touch the floor, there's a feeling of falling behind, like you're chasing something but never really catching it. And that's the rhythm so many people live in, a constant loop of striving without arriving, not because they don't succeed, but because they don't notice when they do. They finish one thing and move to the next without pause, without credit, without breath, and over time this robs them of their motivation, their joy, their ability to feel progress, because when wins aren't acknowledged, they're forgotten, and when they're forgotten, it feels like nothing ever changes. But imagine if every time you made a good decision, showed up when you didn't want to, handled something better than before, said no to something unhealthy, or just got through the day without quitting, you noticed, even briefly, even quietly, if you told yourself that mattered. Because it does, especially when the habit is new, especially when your inner voice isn't used to giving you credit, especially when you've trained yourself to only celebrate when everything is perfect. And the truth is, perfection is rare, but progress is daily. And if you build a system that tracks it, reflects it, honors it, your entire sense of self begins to shift, not because you've become someone else, but because you've finally started treating yourself like someone whose efforts are seen. And that's what builds sustainable change, not just willpower or pressure or discipline, but recognition. So maybe it starts small, a note on your phone, a sentence in a journal, a quiet good job whispered in your head, but if you do it enough, those small wins become internal evidence that you're changing. And over time, they add up to a new identity, one that believes in momentum, one that doesn't wait for applause to feel worthy, because you've learned to give it to yourself. Someone's late, someone cancels, someone replies with a tone that feels sharp, someone forgets something important to you, and in that moment, your mind fills the gaps with stories, not gentle ones, but ones built on fear, on memory, on worst-case assumptions. They don't care, they're using me, they're lazy. They think I'm not important, and it makes sense. Your brain hates uncertainty, so it invents certainty even if that certainty hurts. But what if you pause just long enough to consider another version? Maybe they're overwhelmed, maybe they're grieving, maybe they didn't realize, maybe it's not about you, maybe they're doing the best they can with what they have. And this isn't about excusing bad behavior, it's about protecting your peace. Because when you default to suspicion, you flood your body with stress, you taint the relationship before understanding it, you contribute to tension that might not need to exist. And yes, sometimes people are careless, sometimes they disappoint you, sometimes the story is bad, but what if it's not? What if your choice to believe the softer version actually helps the relationship survive, or at least helps you navigate it without bitterness? Because the truth is, people aren't always what they seem in a single moment, and neither are you. And if you want grace for your own off days, maybe you offer it to others too, not blindly, not forever, but as a first move, because leading with doubt shrinks connection, but leading with curiosity expands it. And often, what someone needs most in their worst moment isn't correction, but kindness, and when you give it, you don't just change the tone of that one interaction. You change what kind of person you are in that interaction, and that's always in your control. You're in a room where the easy option is lying, maybe not a big lie, maybe just bending the truth a little, making yourself look better, avoiding blame, taking credit that's not fully yours, or staying silent when you know something wrong just happened, and nobody would know, nobody would call you out, and maybe you'd even gain something: approval, protection, status, speed. And in that moment, integrity feels optional, like a nice idea but not a requirement, and that's the test. Because integrity isn't tested when it's convenient, it's tested when it's costly, when no one's watching. When doing the right thing means losing the advantage, taking the heat, standing alone, and the truth is that's why it's so rare and also why it's so powerful, because in a world full of shortcuts, the person who moves with quiet honesty becomes unshakable, not because they're perfect, but because they're consistent. They don't need to remember which version of the truth they told. They don't live in fear of exposure, they don't calculate every move for optics. They just are who they say they are, and that makes them trustworthy, not just to others but to themselves, and self-trust is the foundation of every meaningful decision you'll make. Because if you don't believe in your own word, how will you believe in your own potential? And this doesn't mean you never mess up. It means you own it when you do, you correct yourself, you don't hide, and slowly people notice, they respect you. Even if they don't always say it and you sleep differently, because you're not building your life on manipulation or performance, you're building it on something that lasts, and that's what integrity really is. Not just a moral compass, but a strategy for peace, a way to live without armor, without regret, without the weight of pretending to be anything but real. It's strange how easily we forget ourselves, how quickly we start treating rest like a reward and not a requirement, how we normalize exhaustion as the baseline and wear stress like it's a badge of honor. You go through your day attending to everything, deadlines, messages, errands, people's expectations. But somewhere in that loop you disappear, and it's not always dramatic, it's subtle. You skip a meal, you delay sleep, you cancel the walk, you don't drink water until your body forces you to. And you tell yourself you're being efficient, productive, responsible, but slowly, what you're really being is drained, and when that becomes your normal, your identity starts to shift. You become someone who's always tired, easily irritated, disconnected from joy, because when self-care disappears, so does your capacity to fully engage with life. And it's not about luxury or indulgence, it's not about spa days or scented candles, it's about maintenance, repair, regulation. It's about noticing when your system is overloaded and choosing to pause before it breaks. It's about building rituals that support you not just on your best days, but on your most chaotic ones, and that can be simple: sleeping enough, nourishing your body, stretching, breathing, sitting still for 5 minutes, saying no to that one extra obligation. And if you repeat it daily, not randomly, not reactively, but consistently, your nervous system starts to trust you again, your mind starts to quiet. And your baseline changes. You're no longer just surviving the week. You're moving through it with enough fuel to actually live it. And maybe no one claps when you go to bed early or cook a real meal or take a walk instead of scrolling. But over time, those quiet acts of self-care become a declaration that your well-being is not optional, that your life is not an emergency, and that you're no longer willing to be the one person in your world who always comes last. There's a certain pride people carry in being constantly busy, in saying, "I've just been swamped," like it proves something, like struggle is the price of significance. And maybe you've said it too, maybe you feel guilty when you rest, maybe part of you still believes you have to earn rest by being exhausted first. But the truth is, without balance, everything collapses eventually. Your body rebels, your mind dulls, your relationships fray, your creativity dries up, because life is not meant to be all output, all acceleration, all achievement, and even machines break down when they run without pause. So what makes you think you're exempt? What makes you think you'll become more valuable the more you ignore your limits? And balance doesn't mean a perfect 50-50 split. It means awareness. It means knowing when to push and when to pull back, when to say yes and when to say enough. It means noticing when your work stops being meaningful and starts becoming compulsive. When your effort stops being driven by purpose and starts being driven by fear. And that kind of fear, the fear of falling behind, of being seen as lazy, of losing control, it can rob you of years, because rest is not the enemy of progress, it's what makes progress sustainable. And when you learn to rest without guilt, when you allow yourself to step away not because you're broken, but because you're human, you stop treating your life like a deadline and start treating it like a rhythm. And in that rhythm, your energy comes back, your ideas return, your mood improves, and ironically, you become more productive, not because you're pushing harder, but because you're finally moving from a full tank, not fumes. It's uncomfortable when someone points out what you could have done better, even if they're kind about it, even if you know they're right, even if deep down you want to grow, because feedback touches something raw, the part of you that wants to be good already, perfect even, the part that fears being judged, misunderstood, diminished. And because of that fear, many people reject feedback or avoid it or downplay it. They hear only the sting, not the value, and that's a shame, because feedback, when received openly, is one of the most direct paths to growth. It's a mirror, a tool, sometimes a gift you didn't want but needed. And no, not all feedback is useful. Some of it comes from projection, resentment, confusion. But if you develop the ability to listen, not obey blindly, not internalize harshly, but listen with discernment, you unlock a level of self-awareness that most people never reach. You begin to see the blind spots you didn't know you had, the habits you've normalized, the gaps between how you intend to be and how you're actually coming across. And that insight is power, not in a controlling sense, but in an evolving one because when you can adapt, when you can respond without ego, when you can stay steady in the face of constructive criticism, people trust you more, your relationships deepen, your work improves, your confidence grows not because you've become flawless, but because you've stopped fearing flaws and started treating them as data, as direction, as the raw material of mastery. There's a quiet strength in admitting you don't have the answer, especially in a world that rewards certainty, that values quick replies and confident declarations, where people fill silence with guesses just to avoid seeming unprepared, but beneath that rush to seem competent is often a deep fear, the fear of being seen as less, of being judged for not knowing, of losing status or respect. And so we lie, we improvise, we pretend, and we say things like, "I'm pretty sure," or "I read somewhere," when deep down we're not sure at all, and this creates a strange pressure to always have something to say, even when it's hollow, even when we're just echoing what we heard last. And over time that becomes dangerous, because when no one is willing to say, "I don't know," mistakes get repeated, misinformation spreads, and real learning stops. So imagine the shift. If in a meeting, instead of pretending, you said calmly, "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." Or if someone asked your opinion and you replied, "I haven't formed one yet," what would happen is not a loss of credibility, but an increase in trust, because people feel it when you're grounded in reality, not performance. And saying, "I don't know," doesn't mean you're unintelligent. It means you're honest, self-aware, humble enough to learn. It means you value truth over appearance, depth over speed, and it opens the door for curiosity to enter, the kind of curiosity that fuels actual growth. Because only when you admit you're not there yet can you begin to move forward, and maybe if more people said, "I don't know," when they meant it, we'd have fewer experts and more learners, fewer loud opinions and more thoughtful questions, and that kind of world, one where not knowing is a beginning, not a weakness, might be a lot wiser in the end. People feel safest when they feel understood, and often the fastest way to make someone feel that is not through words, but through body, through tone, through rhythm, and that's where mirroring comes in, not as a manipulation, but as a subconscious language of empathy, because when you subtly match someone's posture, pace, or expressions, what you're saying underneath is, "I'm here with you, I see you, I'm not forcing anything." And most of the time, you do this without even realizing it. You lean in when they do. You soften your tone when theirs drops, you nod slightly when they pause, and in return something opens, something settles, because the nervous system detects resonance. And when that happens, trust begins to build and the walls start to fall, and people share more than they plan to, because they feel met. And of course, this has to be real. You can't fake presence. You can't mechanically copy someone and expect magic. The intent behind it matters. You're not trying to control them, you're trying to connect. And that means staying attuned, curious, aware of the emotional temperature of the moment. And the more you practice this, consciously at first, naturally later, the more you'll notice the shift. Conversations become deeper, tension dissolves faster, misunderstandings reduce, and even conflicts find a softer place to land, because when people feel mirrored, they feel less alone, and that alone changes everything. Most people misunderstand willpower. They think it's a sudden burst of strength, a heroic moment of resistance, like saying no to cake or forcing themselves to wake up at 5 a.m. But real willpower doesn't show up in those grand, dramatic gestures. It shows up in the quiet repetition of choices that align with your long-term values, even when they're boring, especially when no one is watching, and that's where self-discipline enters, not as punishment, but as structure. A decision you make once and then repeat until it becomes part of you, like choosing to turn your phone off during focused work, like walking every morning even when it's cold, like not explaining yourself every time someone disagrees, and each time you follow through, each time you stay with the discomfort instead of escaping it, your mind registers it, your identity shifts, your sense of control grows, and slowly the gap between what you want to do and what you actually do begins to close. And that's the true gift of willpower, not to become rigid or robotic, but to stop being ruled by impulse, by distraction, by mood. And people say, "I just don't have the discipline." But the truth is, no one is born with it, it's built, it's trained like a muscle, and it starts with one promise to yourself. That when something matters, you'll do it even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it. And that over time, those small promises become habits, and those habits become a foundation. And from that foundation, almost anything becomes possible. You look at your to-do list, and it stares back like a mountain, tall, jagged, impossible, and you tell yourself you'll start soon, after a snack, after one more scroll, maybe tomorrow when the mood is right. But it never is, because procrastination isn't about laziness, it's about avoidance of discomfort, of pressure, of not knowing where to begin. And the bigger the task feels, the more distant your first step becomes. So your brain chooses comfort now instead of progress later. And then the guilt sets in and the loop repeats. So how do you break it? Not with more force or shame, but with fragmentation. You take the mountain and chip away until it's pebbles. You stop asking, "How do I finish everything?" and start asking, "What is the very first thing I can do that takes under 5 minutes?" Maybe it's opening the file, maybe it's writing the title, maybe it's setting a timer for 10 minutes and promising yourself you can stop after that. And more often than not, once you begin, the resistance weakens because the brain prefers action over anticipation. And with each tiny win, your momentum builds, and suddenly what felt impossible starts to move, not because you became superhuman, but because you lowered the threshold of effort enough to start, and starting is everything. It's the antidote to dread, the crack that lets effort in, and if you practice this long enough, you'll see that even your biggest goals are just collections of small, manageable decisions waiting to be made one at a time. You're sitting with someone, maybe a friend, maybe someone you love, and while they speak, your mind drifts to your inbox, to dinner plans, to something clever you could say next. And you nod, you smile, you even laugh at the right time, but later you can't remember what they said, not really, because you weren't there, not fully, and they felt it, maybe not consciously, but something in them noticed the gap, the invisible absence behind your eyes, and this happens more than we realize, not because we're careless, but because presence is a skill we've stopped practicing. Attention is fractured by noise, and most of us live 2 steps ahead of the moment we're in, so how do you change that? Not by force, but by returning again and again to the simple act of listening, really listening, not to reply or impress, but to understand, to hold space for someone else without making it about you. And when you do this, when you bring your full awareness to the moment, eye contact, stillness, curiosity, the whole interaction shifts. People relax, open up because they feel seen, and you feel more grounded too, because nothing quiets the mind like genuine attention. And in a world that rewards distraction, choosing presence is an act of care, a rare and powerful way to tell someone you matter, not through words, but through your willingness to stay. Anxiety often begins as a whisper, a quiet unease under your ribs, and before long it spreads into your chest, your stomach, your thoughts, turning small worries into endless loops, and the instinct is to fight it, to push it away, to distract or suppress. But that usually makes it worse because anxiety feeds on resistance, and the more you avoid it, the more power it gains. So instead of fighting, what if you observed? That's the core of mindfulness, not peace through escape, but clarity through presence. You slow down, breathe, notice without judgment. You let the feelings exist without trying to fix them right away. You come back to your senses, the temperature of the air, the weight of your body in the chair, the sound of your breath, and in that grounded awareness, something loosens, not because the fear disappears, but because you've stepped out of the storm and into the eye. And from there, you can see things more clearly, your reactions soften. Your thoughts settle, and over time, this practice creates space between stimulus and response, space where choice lives, and that's where healing begins, not in eliminating anxiety completely, but in no longer being ruled by it. And the more you practice returning to the now, the more you realize that the present moment is rarely as terrifying as the future your mind creates, and that realization alone can become your anchor. Every thought you repeat becomes part of the mental architecture you live inside, and most people don't notice how much of that architecture is built from subtle forms of self-rejection. Things like "I'm not good at this," or "I always mess things up," or "people probably don't really like me." And these phrases, once repeated often enough, start to feel like truth, not because they are, but because the brain is a pattern machine, and if you hear something 100 times, it becomes familiar. And familiarity breeds belief, so what happens if you interrupt the loop? What if instead of defaulting to doubt or criticism, you start to inject quiet, clear, affirming sentences like "I can figure this out," or "I am allowed to take up space," or even something as simple as "I'm doing better than I think." And you don't have to believe them fully at first, because the point isn't to force fake confidence, it's to plant better seeds, language that supports instead of sabotages, words that pull you toward growth instead of spirals, and over time, the repetition matters. Because the mind listens, and with consistency, your inner dialogue shifts from an adversary to an ally, not because magic happened, but because you taught your brain a new script, one built not on delusion, but on the possibility that you are more capable, more worthy, and more resilient than your old stories ever allowed you to feel. There's a certain chaos that lives in unspoken thoughts, the way they swirl, repeat, contradict each other, and multiply when left unchecked. And often, the feeling of being overwhelmed isn't about how much you have to do, but how much you're holding in your head without putting anywhere else, and writing is the release valve, not just for emotion, but for clarity. Because when you take what's invisible and make it visible, when you put pen to paper or words to screen, your mind starts to sort things out. Priorities become clear, worries become manageable, and vague discomfort turns into something you can actually name. And naming is power, because once you can describe what's happening inside you, you're no longer lost in it, and this doesn't have to be a poetic process. You don't need to be a writer, you just need to be honest, to let your thoughts come out without censorship, especially the messy ones. And often just 5 or 10 minutes of unfiltered writing can quiet a spiraling mind. Because now the thoughts are outside of you, contained, understood, and that makes room for peace, for action, for deeper awareness. And if you do this regularly, daily, even it becomes a kind of self-anchoring, a habit that brings you back to yourself no matter how scattered the day has been. The way you start your morning often sets the emotional tone for the rest of your day. And while most people roll into their day reactively, checking messages, rushing through tasks, diving into obligations, there's power in reclaiming those first moments as your own, because a good morning routine doesn't have to be complex. It just has to be intentional. Even 10 or 15 minutes of structured calm can rewire your entire experience. Maybe that means waking up a little earlier to stretch, journal, or sit in silence. Maybe it's drinking water before reaching for caffeine. Maybe it's simply moving slowly, deliberately, without noise. And the key is not what you do, but how you do it from a place of presence rather than autopilot. Because when your morning starts with choice instead of chaos, your nervous system thanks you, and your mind follows with more focus, more clarity, more agency throughout the day. And this consistency, done daily, becomes your baseline, your anchor. Something that reminds you that no matter how uncertain or busy life becomes, you can always return to this, a small window of time where you care for yourself before anyone else makes demands, and sometimes that alone is enough to shift your whole direction. You're in a room where something important is being decided, maybe a salary, maybe a contract, maybe the future of how someone treats you, and your heart is already beating faster than it should because you've been taught that silence is awkward, that gaps must be filled, that quiet is a sign of weakness. But that's not true, not in negotiation, not in power dynamics, not when everything you say will be used to shape how much you're worth and how much control you get to keep. The other person throws out an offer, a number, a condition, a request that's too low, too soon, too much, and you feel the instinct to respond instantly, to say well, or actually, or maybe just, because your nervous system is rushing to remove the discomfort in the air. But what you should do, what will change everything, is to do nothing at all, just stay still, keep eye contact, hold the line, and wait. Silence in these moments is not absence, it's pressure, and it speaks louder than any protest or argument, because when you don't fill the air, they start to feel it. They start to explain themselves, to justify, to sweeten the deal, to backtrack without you even asking. And that's when you see it, silence reveals where power really lives. It's not about manipulation, it's about self-control. It's about creating a pause long enough for the truth to come out, theirs and yours, because the one who speaks first often gives more than they realize, while the one who stays silent holds the map and watches where the other walks. In your personal life, this applies too, during arguments, during moments of confrontation, when someone says something cruel or manipulative or deeply unfair, and expects you to react immediately, to defend, to justify, to explain. But instead, you choose stillness, you say nothing, you breathe, and in that breath, you regain control, you make them sit with what they said, you stop performing for their benefit, and you let the truth of the moment settle without decoration. It feels unnatural at first, because silence in our world is feared, but once you try it, once you see how much information flows into the quiet, how much power shifts when you no longer rush to fill it, you start to trust it, you start to use it not as a weapon, but as a boundary, as a space where you don't have to defend your worth with noise. So next time you're negotiating something that matters, a price, a relationship dynamic, your time, your space, remember that silence isn't nothing, it's a statement, and sometimes the loudest thing you can say is absolutely nothing. You're sitting across from someone who matters to you, a friend, a partner, someone you want to stay in your life, and you feel the urge to be strong, to say the right thing, to present the polished version of your thoughts, because you think that's what keeps people close, competence, control, composure, but you'd be wrong, because what bonds people most is not perfection, but exposure, the kind that says, here, as something I don't show anyone, or I was scared when that happened. Or sometimes, I don't know what I'm doing either. We all walk around wearing layers, trying to be safe, trying to be seen in a way that hides what might be judged. But the paradox is, the moment you reveal what you think will push someone away is often the moment they finally come closer, because vulnerability isn't weakness, it's an invitation, and the more honest it is, the more powerful it becomes. Think of the times you've connected most deeply with someone. It wasn't when they impressed you, it was when they cracked open, even just a little, said something that made you feel like you weren't alone in your doubts, in your fears, in your not knowing. Vulnerability creates mirrors, and people step into those mirrors and realize they're allowed to stop pretending too. And when that happens, the relationship becomes real, not just convenient, not just entertaining, but rooted in something more than roles and timing. And no, this doesn't mean you spill everything, or collapse in front of everyone, or make your inner world someone else's responsibility. It means you choose your moments with care, you offer truth instead of defense, you say that really hurt instead of whatever, or I missed you, instead of I've been busy, or I need help, instead of I've got it under control. It feels risky because it is, but it's also the only way real closeness is built, the kind that doesn't need constant maintenance because it was never built on performance in the first place. So think about the people in your life who matter and ask yourself, have you shown them the part of you that's not always okay, the part that's still figuring it out, the part that's tired or confused or in awe of something tender? Because that's where relationships grow, not in perfection, but in presence. And you don't need to fix yourself to be worthy of that kind of closeness. You just need to show up real. You're talking to someone and they're telling you a story you've heard a dozen times before, or you're in a meeting and someone's droning on, or you're on a date and the conversation is drifting towards silence, and you feel the urge to either change the subject or check out, because you assume you already know where this is going, what kind of person they are, what you'll get from this. But what you don't realize is how much richness you miss every time you stop being curious. Curiosity isn't just about asking questions, it's about shifting your posture from "I already know" to "what don't I know yet?" And that shift can open up entire worlds, not just in others, but in you. Most people walk around waiting for their turn to talk, filtering everything through their own story, scanning for overlap, but when you ask open-ended questions, real ones, the kind that don't have clear answers, you break that loop. You give the other person space to reveal something unscripted, and more often than not, you find out something surprising. Instead of "did you like it?" try "what did that feel like?" Instead of "how was your weekend?" try "what's something that made you laugh recently?" Instead of "are you okay?" try "what's been on your mind the most lately?" Questions like these don't just get better answers, they make people feel seen, and when people feel seen, they open up, they stop defending, they start trusting. And the same thing happens inside you. When you stop narrating and start exploring, you uncover your own blind spots, your assumptions, your fixed stories that no longer serve you. Curiosity is the antidote to judgment, and it's also the cure for boredom, for cynicism, for the slow decay of relationships that feel stale, not because they are, but because you stopped asking. So next time you catch yourself zoning out, thinking, "I already know what they're going to say," pause, lean in, and ask something different, something real, something open. Because people are always deeper than they seem, you just have to give them the space to go there. You wake up expecting the day to go a certain way. The meeting will start on time, the train will arrive when it should, the person you're supposed to meet will say the things you rehearsed answers for, but then the meeting is canceled, the train is delayed, the person forgets or changes their mind or shows up with a different energy than you anticipated, and suddenly your internal rhythm is thrown off, not because something catastrophic happened, but because the map in your head no longer matches the terrain in front of you, and you don't know how to walk without a map. This is what it means to lack adaptability, to confuse control with safety, to rely so heavily on predictability that any deviation feels like a threat. And you may not say it out loud, but your body tells the truth, the tension, the rush, the silent frustration, the feeling of being unmoored because the plan changed. But life does not ask for your permission before it shifts direction. It does not apologize for bad timing or inconsistent people or surprise detours. And so the only thing that separates those who suffer from change and those who flow through it is this: adaptability, the ability to adjust not by force but by flexibility, to meet the moment as it is, not as it was supposed to be. You see it in people who carry peace even when things fall apart. They're not indifferent, they're just not rigid. They don't argue with reality, they move with it, like a tree that bends with the wind but doesn't break. And the irony is, those who bend are stronger than those who resist. Adaptability is not about becoming passive or giving up on goals. It's about responding instead of reacting, noticing the shift, absorbing the change, and recalibrating without turning every disruption into a crisis. It looks like choosing a new path when the old one disappears, adjusting your tone when the energy in the room changes, starting over without resentment when your first attempt fails. You can't predict everything, but you can build the skill of movement, mental movement, emotional movement, strategic movement, and the more you practice, the less life can shake you, because you no longer depend on everything going your way in order to be okay. You start to trust that whatever the moment brings, you'll find your way through it, not because you had a plan for this exact scenario, but because you've trained yourself to move. And in a world that changes faster than you can control, that's not just a survival skill, it's freedom. Every day you wake up with a limited battery. Even if you slept well, even if you feel motivated, even if your mind says yes to everything, your energy is not infinite. And pretending it is will cost you more than you realize, not all at once, but slowly in pieces, in ways you don't track until one day you're exhausted and resentful and not sure why. Because the truth is, most people don't burn out from doing too much. They burn out from doing too much of the wrong things, from giving their energy to tasks that don't matter, people who don't give back, obligations that were never theirs to begin with, and the problem is, they never pause to ask, is this really worth it? Prioritizing your energy means something deeper than productivity hacks or to-do lists. It means becoming aware of the emotional cost of everything you do, every person you interact with, every choice you say yes to, because even things that seem small, like answering that one text or agreeing to that quick favor or engaging in that pointless argument, take something from you. It means noticing where your energy leaks, the guilt-driven yesies, the mindless scrolling, the mental replays of conversations you can't change, and learning to patch those leaks with silence, boundaries, and intention. It means realizing that not every opportunity is worth the effort, not every friendship is worth saving, not every response deserves a reply, and sometimes, protecting your peace will look like disappointing people who expect you to be available at the cost of your own well-being. It also means knowing what replenishes you, the people who leave you feeling clearer, not clouded, the work that aligns with your values, not just your skills, the moments that bring you back to yourself instead of dragging you into other people's chaos. You can't control everything that demands your energy, but you can start asking, before every commitment, before every interaction, before every yes, will this give me more than it takes, or will it take more than I have left? Because if you don't protect your energy, someone else will spend it for you, and they'll never value it the way you should. So maybe it's time to stop measuring your day by how much you got done, and start measuring it by how much energy you protected. Because energy is the currency of attention, and where your energy goes, your life follows. You wake up already dreading the day, maybe because of something someone did, something that went wrong, something that hasn't changed despite how hard you tried, and you start narrating the story again, how unfair it is, how others have it easier, how no one sees how much you've endured, and the more you tell that story, the more you believe it, and the more powerless you feel. This is the trap of the victim mentality, the belief that life is something that happens to you, not something you participate in, and it's seductive because it offers relief, it says you're not to blame, it says the world is cruel and you're just surviving, it lets you avoid hard questions by replacing them with blame. And in the short term, it feels good to be the one who was wronged, the one who suffered, the one who deserves more. But long term, it rots your power from the inside, because every time you blame, you give something away, your agency, your responsibility, your ability to influence the next move. Avoiding the victim mentality doesn't mean denying pain, it doesn't mean pretending everything is fine or blaming yourself for things you didn't cause. It means owning your response. It means saying this happened and now what? Instead of this happened and that's why I'm stuck forever. It means choosing growth over comfort, ownership over resentment, clarity over story. You start to notice the loops, how the same kinds of people show up in your life, how the same types of problems repeat, how the same reactions come out of you, and instead of just pointing outward, you look inward and ask, what pattern am I still feeding? What story am I addicted to? And that question alone begins to change everything, because it shifts you from narrator to editor, from passive observer to active participant, and once you reclaim that role, you start making different decisions, not because the world got easier, but because you got stronger. It's not about pretending to be invincible, it's about refusing to stay helpless, even when helplessness feels justified. Because the longer you stay in the story of what happened to you, the less you realize what you can do with what happens next. And that's where the shift begins, not in denying the past, but in refusing to let it narrate your future. You hear the words and your stomach tightens. Maybe it's in their tone, maybe it's the way they say it like they know you better than you know yourself. Maybe it's the timing, how it always comes when you're already tired, already unsure, already stretched thin. But there it is, the criticism, the feedback, the suggestion, the judgment, and your mind reacts before you can stop it, defending, rationalizing, shrinking, or maybe pretending not to care while inside you're spiraling, replaying the moment again and again. Not because of what was said, but because of what you made it mean about you. This is the pattern most people live in. They take criticism personally, as if every comment about their behavior is an attack on their identity, as if every correction is proof of inadequacy. And so they shut down or push back or build walls, not because they're proud, but because they're scared of being seen, scared of being less than perfect, scared of confirming the doubts they already carry. But criticism, when approached differently, can be the doorway to a better version of yourself, not because everyone else is right about you, but because feedback is information, and if you can learn to hold it without losing your center, you can use it to grow instead of letting it shrink you. Reframing criticism means shifting from "they're attacking me" to "what can I learn here?" Even when the delivery is imperfect, even when the words sting, even when the intention isn't kind, because the truth is, most people are clumsy with their feedback, and if you wait for perfect tone or timing, you'll miss most of what life is trying to teach you. Sometimes the lesson isn't even in the content, it's in the discomfort, in the way your body responds, in the sensitivity that reveals where your self-worth is too dependent on approval, in the defense that shows what you're still trying to prove. You don't have to agree with every critique, but you can pause and ask, is there a pattern here? Have I heard this before? What part of this triggers me and why? And even if the answer is that it's not true, that it's projection or misunderstanding, you've still learned something about them, about you, about the dynamic, and about your power to stay rooted even when someone else tries to pull you off balance. The most resilient people are not the ones who never get hurt by words. They're the ones who learn from the pain without turning it into identity, who can sift through feedback for gold without swallowing the dirt, who don't need to be flawless to be worthy. So the next time someone points something out, pause, breathe, stay curious, and remember, criticism is not the enemy of growth, your fear of it is. You want to get it right, you want to say the perfect thing, make the perfect impression, show up as the best version of yourself every time. But life is messy, people are unpredictable, and no matter how hard you try, you will forget, you will stumble, you will react from emotion, you will say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and so will everyone around you. Perfection is an illusion we chase to feel safe. We think if we're flawless, we'll be loved, if we're consistent, we'll be respected, if we never mess up, we'll never be abandoned. But in reality, the more you demand perfection from yourself and others, the more disconnected you become. Because perfectionism is not the pursuit of excellence, it's the fear of being seen as flawed, and when you live from that fear, you start hiding, overcorrecting, judging both yourself and everyone else, and you miss the very thing that makes connection possible: authenticity. Accepting imperfection doesn't mean lowering your standards or giving up on growth. It means holding space for reality, for human error, for tired moments, for clumsy words, for evolving perspectives. It means letting go of the fantasy that people will always say what you want to hear, do what you expect, or meet you exactly where you are, and it means releasing yourself from the same impossible pressure. You begin to see that your worth is not in your polish, but in your presence, that your relationships don't deepen through flawless performance, but through honesty and repair. The moments you think will make people respect you, the perfect speeches, the right answers, the spotless record, are rarely the moments that make them trust you. People trust what is real. They connect with the parts of you that struggle, that try again, that admit when they fall short. When you stop punishing yourself for being human, you start to create a world where others can breathe around you, where they don't feel like they're walking on eggshells, where grace becomes the culture instead of criticism. So next time you slip, pause before spiraling, forgive before fixing, and remember that the goal is not to be perfect, it's to be whole, and wholeness includes the cracks. You're in a disagreement, maybe with a partner, a coworker, a friend, and the energy shifts, voices tighten, assumptions rise, and suddenly it's not about the issue anymore. It's about being right, being heard, being validated, and the harder you push, the more they push back, and before you know it, you're stuck in a loop, defending, explaining, repeating, escalating. Most conflicts don't explode because of the topic, they escalate because of unmet emotional needs, the need to be understood, to feel safe, to not be dismissed, and once those needs are threatened, logic leaves the room and emotion takes over. But empathy, when used intentionally, cuts through the noise, not by agreeing, not by conceding, but by signaling, I see you even if I disagree with you. It starts with listening, not just to the words, but to what's underneath, the fear, the frustration, the unmet expectation, and then responding not with defense, but with reflection, not "you're wrong, but this is what I hear you feeling." Empathy doesn't mean giving up your position. It means softening the ground so that both people can stand on it without attack. It looks like saying, I get why that would upset you, even if you wouldn't react the same way. It looks like asking, what do you need from me right now, instead of assuming you already know. It looks like staying calm when their emotions spike, not because you're unaffected, but because you're committed to de-escalation. When people feel seen, they stop shouting. When they feel heard, they stop defending. Conflict diffuses not when someone wins, but when both sides feel safe enough to let their guard down. And that safety often starts with empathy, the quiet choice to understand before being understood, to connect before correcting, to seek the human beneath the heat. It doesn't always solve everything, but it changes the atmosphere, and sometimes that's enough to bring the conversation back from the edge. So the next time things get tense, don't just fight harder, listen deeper, and see what changes when empathy enters the room. You've been taught that in any negotiation, someone wins and someone loses, that if you want to come out on top, you need to push harder, talk louder, protect your interests at all costs, and maybe that worked once or twice. Maybe you got the raise, closed the deal, or avoided getting taken advantage of, but somewhere along the way, the victories started feeling empty. The relationship strained, the tension lingering even after you got your way because you sensed it. The cost of winning when someone else loses is too high if you want long-term trust, real connection, or sustainable success. Creating win-win situations is not about being nice or giving in. It's about recognizing that your success doesn't have to come at someone else's expense. That value multiplies when both sides feel respected, and that the best outcomes are the ones where no one walks away bitter, unseen, or used. It starts with shifting your mindset from how do I get what I want to how can we both walk away better than we came in, from my gain is your loss to our gain is shared. Because the truth is, most people are not unreasonable, they just want to feel heard, protected, and considered. When you walk into a conversation already planning to win alone, you trigger defenses, but when you come in curious, collaborative, and clear about what matters most, you open the door to creative solutions that neither side would have found alone. Maybe it's a business partner who's pushing for something you can't fully give. Maybe it's a friend or partner who feels like they're always compromising. Maybe it's a team member who wants more freedom while you're focused on structure. Instead of digging in, ask what they truly need, what outcome they're trying to create, and what would make them feel valued. Often the conflict is not about the surface ask, it's about the need beneath it: respect, fairness, agency, recognition. And when you meet that need in a way that doesn't cost your own, you unlock trust. And from trust comes flexibility, creativity, and a shared willingness to build something better. This doesn't mean everyone gets everything. It means both sides walk away with dignity intact, with the sense that even if they didn't get 100%, they got something real and they were seen along the way. In a world obsessed with domination and leverage, choosing to build win-win outcomes is radical, but it's also the only strategy that scales, because people remember how you made them feel long after the agreement is signed, and if they feel burned, the cost will come later. So start practicing in small ways, the way you divide responsibilities at home, the way you handle disagreements at work, the way you respond when someone asks for more than you can give. Look for the third option, the bridge, the middle path that honors you both. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it, because when you choose win-win, you're not just solving problems, you're building alliances, and those last longer than any victory ever could. You felt it before, that surge of truth at the back of your throat, the moment when you know exactly what needs to be said, the real thought, the sharp observation, the thing no one else is willing to voice, and part of you wants to blurt it out, raw, unfiltered, because honesty is noble and truth is sacred, right? But then you say it too fast, too cold, too exact, and you watch their face change, the shutdown, the defensiveness, the silence. And even if everything you said was factually correct, something's broken now, because the truth, no matter how right, lost its impact the moment it lost its humanity. Being honest is essential, but being honest without tact is just another form of ego, the need to say it all, prove you know, show you're not afraid, and often, it serves you more than it serves the person in front of you. Tact is not censorship, it's precision, it's delivery, it's knowing that timing matters, tone matters, context matters, and when your goal is connection, not just expression, you choose your truth carefully, not to hide it, but to land it. Think of the moments someone gave you feedback you could actually hear, not because it was gentle, but because it came with care, because you felt safe in the way it was offered, because they didn't just drop the truth and walk away, they stayed, they explained, they left room for your reaction. Tact doesn't mean sugarcoating, it means empathy in motion, the ability to read the room, sense the state, and adjust accordingly. You can say, I think there's something we need to address, instead of, you're doing it all wrong. You can say, here's how I experienced that, instead of, you always make things worse. You can say, can we talk about what just happened, instead of, you're unbelievable. It's not about making everything soft, it's about making it land. Because the goal of communication isn't to dump your thoughts, it's to create clarity, understanding, and ideally, change. And change only happens when people feel seen, not attacked. So next time you feel the urge to speak your mind, pause, breathe, and ask, is this the best version of the truth? Not the most brutal, not the most immediate, but the version that honors what needs to be said without abandoning how it's received. When you master this, honesty with tact, people start coming to you more, not less, because they trust your voice, not just your opinion. And you become the kind of person who not only tells the truth, but makes people stronger with it. You're standing at the edge of a choice. Maybe it's small, like speaking up in a meeting where you usually stay quiet, or maybe it's massive, like changing careers, ending a long relationship, starting something that feels bigger than you, but either way the sensation is the same, that mix of fear and excitement, doubt and curiosity, and your mind starts calculating the risk, the cost, the embarrassment, the what-ifs. And usually, that's where people freeze. Because risk, by nature, involves the unknown, and the unknown threatens the illusion of control, of safety, of stability. But the truth is, your life doesn't change by staying where you're comfortable. It changes when you move toward what scares you a little and calls you a lot, when you stop waiting for certainty and start building confidence through action. Calculated risk is not recklessness, it's discernment, it's asking, what's the real downside, what's the potential gain, what's the cost of not doing it, and what does my gut say when I strip away the noise? Because often the biggest risk isn't trying and failing, it's staying the same and pretending you're okay with it. Think of the times you grew the most. It probably wasn't when everything was safe and scripted. It was when you took a chance, when you stretched, when you jumped, even if it wasn't graceful. You signed up for something that intimidated you. You ended something that drained you. You reached out, showed up, said yes to something that didn't come with a guarantee. And in doing so, you met a part of yourself you hadn't accessed before, the part that learns by doing, that builds muscle by lifting real weight, that gains clarity through motion. To challenge yourself doesn't mean to always be uncomfortable. It means to regularly interrupt the habits that keep you small. It means asking, where am I playing not to lose, instead of playing to grow? Calculated risk isn't loud, it isn't showy sometimes. It's as quiet as clicking send, showing up to the first class, having the hard conversation, applying when you don't meet every requirement, raising your hand when your voice shakes. You don't have to gamble everything. You just have to stop choosing the illusion of certainty over the possibility of becoming more. And if you fail, fine, at least now you know, at least now you're moving, at least now you're practicing the kind of bravery that builds a life you won't regret. Because staying safe isn't the same as being fulfilled, and at some point, the fear of staying stuck has to become scarier than the fear of falling forward. It's not the bursts of inspiration that build something real. It's not the rare nights when motivation hits and you do 5 hours of work in a trance. It's not the sudden gym streak or the one perfect week of clean eating, deep reading, journaling, meditation. It's what happens after that when the high wears off, when life gets messy again, when you're tired, distracted, unmotivated, and no one's watching, and you still show up, still move the needle, still keep the rhythm alive. Because consistency is what separates desire from discipline, potential from progress, fantasy from actual transformation. Most people think they need to feel it, to wait for clarity, for the perfect conditions, for the right time to begin, but the truth is, consistency is not born from excitement. It's built through repetition, through structure, through decisions you make before the feelings change. If you only act when it feels good, your growth will always be conditional, but when you act because it's part of who you're becoming, because it aligns with the life you're building, then the resistance becomes part of the ritual, not the end of it. Think about any long-term change, fitness, learning a language, building a business, becoming more emotionally aware. None of it comes from extremes. It comes from small, repeated actions that compound that stack, that slowly change who you are on a baseline level. Maybe you write one paragraph a day. Maybe you practice 10 minutes of something difficult. Maybe you speak up in one more meeting, ask one more question, say no one more time. It doesn't have to be huge. It just has to happen again and again and again. Consistency isn't glamorous. It won't impress people at first. It won't go viral. But it builds self-trust in a way nothing else can, because when you do what you said you'd do, not once, but every time, especially when it's hard, you begin to believe in your own follow-through, and that belief carries into everything else. The results won't come overnight. You won't feel changed after a week. But one day, someone will ask how you became so calm, or strong, or clear, or skilled, and you'll realize you don't even know the answer, because it wasn't one big shift. It was 100 tiny ones that happened while no one was looking. So if you're tired of starting over, stop quitting. If you want momentum, build rhythm. If you want to be great at something, show up when it's boring. That's where the real work begins. There's what you want to say, and then there's when you say it. There's what you want to do, and then there's when you do it. And the gap between the two is where wisdom lives, because timing isn't just a detail. It's often the difference between success and failure, understanding and confusion, connection and collapse. Maybe you've rushed into a conversation because you couldn't hold the emotion any longer. Maybe you've told someone your truth before they were ready to hear it. Maybe you pushed a change before the situation could support it. And even if your intentions were pure, even if your message was right, it fell flat, or worse, it triggered resistance because the timing was off and the moment wasn't built yet. Learning timing is about more than patience. It's about pattern recognition, about sensing readiness, about knowing when the conditions are right for something to land, to grow, to take root. You can't force clarity on someone who's still in confusion. You can't demand growth from someone still in survival. You can't pour insight into someone who hasn't yet emptied what's blocking it. And sometimes that someone is you. You might have ideas that are brilliant but not yet baked. You might have feelings that are real but not yet grounded. You might have changes you need to make, but the foundation is not yet stable. Understanding timing is about watching more, waiting more, reading the moment instead of rushing to reshape it. It's about noticing when someone finally opens a question instead of giving answers they didn't ask for. It's about choosing to hold something a little longer if it means it will land better. This doesn't mean waiting forever or being passive. It means being strategic, tuned in, intentional. In relationships, this means picking your moments, not weaponizing silence, but respecting the emotional atmosphere. In work, this means pitching when people are listening, not when they're drowning. In self-development, this means pacing yourself, not because you're lazy, but because you understand sustainability matters more than speed. When you align your truth with the right timing, your impact multiplies, people hear you differently, opportunities unfold smoother, and you stop wasting energy on fights that don't need to be fights. So before your next move, ask not just what do I want, but is this the moment it can actually work? Because growth isn't just about effort, it's about rhythm. And rhythm, like music, only works when timing is respected. You try again and again to fix it, to explain it, to make it make sense. You replay the conversation, rewrite the message. Wonder what would have happened if you had said it differently, acted sooner, waited longer. You keep your mind trapped in loops where you are still responsible for what's already gone, for what's not even yours, for how someone else feels, thinks, behaves. And slowly, your energy bleeds into things you cannot change, their reaction, their choices, the past, the weather, the algorithm, the traffic, the silence, the delay, the injustice, until you are exhausted, bitter, helpless. Learning to let go of what you can't control doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop leaking your energy into places that give you nothing back. It means you return to your center and ask, what can I do right now, from where I am, with what I have? It's one of the hardest habits to build, because control feels safe. It gives you the illusion that if you just do enough, anticipate enough, hold tight enough, you can protect yourself from disappointment. But the truth is, control is often the very thing that creates suffering, because it fights with reality instead of working with it. Letting go is not giving up, it's giving the burden back to where it belongs. You're not responsible for how someone interprets your boundary. You're not responsible for the timing of the opportunity. You're not responsible for the chaos of the world. You are responsible for how you respond, how you stay aligned, how you carry yourself through uncertainty. When you start practicing this, you begin to feel lighter. Not because everything's fixed, but because you stop trying to carry what isn't yours. You start breathing more, you start focusing on your lane, you start showing up to your life, not just managing everyone else's. It's not easy, you'll still slip, still want to control, still feel the pull to over-explain, overfix, overthink. But with practice, the letting go gets faster. You catch yourself sooner. You release the need to be the fixer, the hero, the psychic. And in that release, you find space. To rest, to act where it matters, to live without being owned by what's outside of you. So the next time something spirals that you didn't choose, ask yourself, is this mine to hold? And if the answer is no, let go and return to what is. You don't notice the erosion at first, the tiny ways you stretch yourself just a little further, the way you say yes when you're tired, the way you answer that call even when you're in the middle of something sacred, the way you keep smiling even when someone crosses a line you didn't know you had, because boundaries, for most people, aren't broken in explosions, they're chipped away in whispers, in sighs, in silence. And it's not that others are always cruel, it's that you often forget to protect yourself because part of you still thinks your worth is proven through availability, through flexibility, through not making things uncomfortable for others. But the truth is, the more you blur your boundaries, the more you disappear inside your own life. Your time becomes someone else's, your attention is constantly hijacked, your emotions managed by external needs, and soon you're not living, you're reacting. Boundaries aren't walls, they're definitions. They're not weapons, they're invitations for respect. When you say, I'm not free at that time, you're not being rude, you're honoring the rhythm you need. When you say, please don't speak to me that way, you're not creating conflict, you're preserving your dignity. And when you say, that's not mine to carry, you're not abandoning someone, you're protecting your own peace. But setting boundaries also means dealing with what happens after, the guilt, the backlash, the fear that people will leave, will call you difficult, selfish, cold. Some might test you. Some might withdraw the approval you used to earn through compliance. And that's the cost not of boundaries, but of finally valuing your own space. Over time, you'll notice something else. Not everyone leaves. Some stay, some respect you more, some even follow your lead. Because peace is magnetic, and people can feel when you're no longer surviving your life but living it on your terms. So ask yourself, what have I been tolerating that's draining me? Where have I been available to everyone but absent to myself? And what would it feel like to protect my peace, not just once, but every single day? There's a kind of freedom that only forgiveness can give, not for them, but for you. Not because what they did was okay, but because carrying the weight of it is slowly making you tired in ways you don't realize. Resentment doesn't just sit quietly in the mind, it leaks into the tone of your voice, into your ability to trust, into the tension in your shoulders, into the way you walk through new doors already expecting disappointment. And most people don't even see it happen because anger can look like strength, bitterness can masquerade as protection, the refusal to forgive can feel like justice. But in the end, what it really is a loop, a mental cage that replays the same hurt in different contexts over and over again. Forgiving quickly doesn't mean you forget, it doesn't mean you excuse, it means you let the moment end, you let the person return to their own path. You release the version of them in your head that keeps doing the same thing, and instead you reclaim the energy that's been stuck there. This doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. You can forgive and still say goodbye. You can forgive and still say never again. You can forgive and still choose distance, silence, closure. The speed of forgiveness isn't about weakness, it's about wisdom, because the longer you wait to forgive, the longer they stay with you, even if they're gone, even if you never speak again. Quick forgiveness isn't approval, it's survival. You deserve peace before they apologize. You deserve stillness before they understand. You deserve to move on even if they never look back. So try just once to let go before it's perfect, to soften before they deserve it, to cut the cord not for them, but for your future. And you'll see, the moment you stop rehearsing what they did, you'll start remembering who you are. The moment something goes wrong, your body tenses, your breath shortens, your thoughts accelerate, you try to fix it, solve it, control it, understand it, manage it, and in that spiral you become part of the chaos. You merge with the problem, you react instead of respond. Detachment isn't about becoming numb or indifferent. It's about stepping back far enough to see the whole picture. It's about pausing before you pour gasoline on a fire. It's about giving yourself space between the trigger and the reaction, so that when you move, it's not from fear but from clarity. In any stressful situation, an argument, a deadline, a conflict, a change, you have a choice, to be consumed or to observe. The ones who master detachment don't avoid problems, they stay calm inside them. They learn to separate what's happening from what they're telling themselves about what's happening. They breathe when others panic. They ask, what matters right now? Instead of chasing every anxious impulse, detachment isn't distance, it's discipline. It's the ability to stay emotionally regulated even when your environment is. It's choosing perspective over panic. It's understanding that not every storm requires your full immersion, and once you practice it, even once, you'll feel the difference, the moment when your body starts to react, and you catch it, hold it, redirect it. You'll realize that stress doesn't come from the event, it comes from the story you attach to it, and stories can change. You're allowed to step back. You're allowed to say, let me think before I speak. You're allowed to not spiral just because something unexpected happened. In fact, the more you do this, the more others will start turning to you in chaos because they'll feel your presence, your steadiness, your ability to stay grounded when things shake. And maybe over time you'll realize detachment isn't coldness. It's strength, and in a world that constantly tries to pull you into noise, that strength is everything. You're not always going to understand people, not fully, not in the way they hope, not in the way that makes sense to you, because their choices will confuse you, their tone will feel sharp, their priorities will clash with yours, their behavior will seem irrational or selfish or cold. And in those moments it's easy to label, to assume, to judge, to protect yourself by deciding they're wrong or broken or just difficult. But what would happen if instead you paused and tried to imagine what pain shaped this moment? What memory, what fear, what invisible wound was playing out behind their reaction? What story they've carried so long they can't tell it apart from who they are? Because empathy isn't about excusing people. It's about recognizing that we all bleed from somewhere, that not every sharp word is malice, that not every silence is distance, that sometimes people lash out because they're drowning and don't know how to ask for air. And when you choose empathy as your first instinct, not your last, you stop taking things so personally, you stop reacting to the surface, you begin responding to the human underneath, and that changes everything, not just for them, but for you, because empathy softens the body, protects you from unnecessary resentment, expands your understanding, and strengthens your self-control. And no, this doesn't mean you ignore patterns, it doesn't mean you tolerate abuse, it doesn't mean you become the emotional trash can for someone else's unresolved trauma. It means that even when you walk away, you do so with peace instead of bitterness, with compassion instead of coldness, because empathy isn't weakness, it's a discipline. It's a choice you make every time someone's energy hits you wrong and you ask, what might they be carrying that I can't see? And maybe, just maybe, that pause is enough to save a relationship, or de-escalate a conflict, or prevent you from saying something you'll regret, or even just let you walk away with your inner world still intact. Because if there's one thing that can soften your own life, it's refusing to become the pain that someone else gave you. There's something quietly powerful about saying, that was on me. No excuses, no shifting blame, no rehearsed defenses, just a clear admission that you missed the mark, said the wrong thing, dropped the ball, acted out of fear, reacted from ego, and while it's uncomfortable, while it might sting your pride, what it gives back is far more valuable: integrity, credibility, and the rare freedom of self-respect. Because people who always deflect, who always say, yeah, but, who always find a way to blame the system, the timing, the other person, end up trapped in a loop where growth is impossible, where relationships become brittle, where trust erodes quietly over time. But when you take ownership, you prove to yourself and others that your character isn't conditional, that you can face what's real and learn from it and rise without pretending. And yes, you might fear the judgment, you might imagine the shame, but the reality is, most people admire accountability more than perfection. They don't need you to be flawless. They need to know that when you stumble, you'll notice and repair and own it and try again, and not just in grand moments, but in small ones too, like when you speak too harshly and say, I was frustrated, but that wasn't okay. Or when you forget something important and say, I know that mattered to you and I should have done better, because that's where real trust is built, not in being right, but in being honest. And the more you do this, the stronger your sense of self becomes, because you're no longer hiding from your flaws, you're meeting them, learning from them, shaping them into tools instead of weights. And people will notice, they'll feel safer around you, because they'll see you're not afraid of being wrong, and that means you're less likely to pretend, to manipulate, to spin the truth. And in a world full of finger-pointing, that kind of groundedness is rare, so next time something breaks, instead of asking, whose fault is this, ask yourself, what was my part and what can I do better next time? And let that question lead you not into guilt, but into growth. The moment is always tempting, the impulse always louder than the plan, because the brain is wired for survival, not strategy. And what feels good now almost always wins over what pays off later: the extra hour of scrolling instead of working, the comforting lie instead of the hard truth, the temporary high instead of the slow build. And it's not that you're lazy or weak or undisciplined, it's that long-term thinking requires discomfort. It asks you to delay gratification, to endure silence. To tolerate boredom, to stay loyal to goals that haven't rewarded you yet. And that's not natural, it's intentional. It's something you train like a muscle. And every time you choose the bigger picture over the quick hit, you're strengthening that muscle, you're telling your brain, I'm not just here to feel good, I'm here to build something real, and the people who master this, they're not superhuman, they're just consistent. They choose the salad when the craving screams for fries. They save the money when their fingers itch to buy. They stay focused when the phone lights up. They say not yet when everything inside them says just this once. And over time, those little choices stack up, compound, reshape who they are, because success doesn't arrive in a burst, it arrives in layers. In unseen efforts, in private sacrifices, in moments where you quietly choose discipline over dopamine. And yes, it's hard, and yes, some days you'll fail, you'll cave, you'll backslide, but the point isn't perfection, it's direction. And if every week you make just a few more long-term choices than short-term ones, your life will change, not all at once, but in ways you can't ignore, because there's a kind of peace that only comes from knowing you're no longer chasing comfort, you're building your future. One decision at a time. There's a part of you that already knows when something isn't enough, when a job, a relationship, a habit, or even a mindset is just barely scratching the surface of what you could be. And yet you stay, not because it fulfills you, not because it makes you proud, but because it's familiar, predictable, stable enough to keep you from falling but too small to let you rise. And over time, mediocrity doesn't just dull your potential, it becomes your identity, not because that's who you are, but because it's who you've allowed yourself to be. And maybe it started with one compromise, one this is fine, one it's not that bad. But mediocrity rarely screams, it whispers, it eases in. It tells you to stop reaching, to avoid risks, to be grateful for what you have even when it drains you. And you listen because the fear of failure is louder than the pull of greatness, but deep down, you know you weren't built to coast. You weren't built to survive inside safe routines that don't challenge your heart or stretch your mind. You were built to outgrow things, to get uncomfortable, to do hard things that scare you and prove that you're more than your current limits. And the truth is, settling doesn't protect you. It just numbs you. And numbness isn't peace, it's delay, and one day that delay becomes regret, and you'll look back and realize the scariest thing wasn't failure. It was watching yourself shrink into a version of you that you never admired. So start small if you have to. Question one thing that no longer excites you. Change one routine that no longer serves you. Speak one truth you've been swallowing, and watch what happens when you stop saying it's fine and start asking what's possible. Because the moment you stop settling, even just internally, your entire world starts to shift, not because it owes you anything, but because you finally decided to meet it as someone who knows they deserve more. You can walk the road alone, figure things out through trial and error, push through walls without a map, but there's a difference between self-made and needlessly lost, because no matter how smart you are, how driven, how resourceful, there are perspectives you don't yet have, blind spots you can't see from where you stand, and having someone who's already walked a version of your path doesn't make you weak. It makes you strategic, because a good mentor doesn't just tell you what to do. They reflect you back to yourself, they challenge your excuses, they hold you accountable not to who you are but to who you could be, and yes, it's uncomfortable because they'll see through your distractions. They'll hear the lies you tell yourself, they'll ask you questions that make you confront what you've been avoiding. But that's where growth happens, in the tension between who you've been and who you want to become, and a mentor lives in that space with you, not to push you, but to walk beside you while you push yourself and know. You don't need someone famous or wealthy or perfect. You need someone real, someone who remembers how it feels to start where you are, someone who listens more than they speak and reminds you that greatness isn't about speed. It's about clarity and direction, so don't be afraid to reach out, to ask for help, to say, I admire how you think, can we talk? Because the people worth learning from won't judge you for being unfinished, they'll respect you for being intentional, and the longer you try to do everything alone, the more likely you are to repeat cycles that someone else already escaped. So borrow their wisdom, learn from their patterns, adapt their lessons, and let your growth be accelerated not by chance, but by connection, because sometimes one conversation can open a door you never knew existed. The world doesn't stop asking, it doesn't stop pulling. There's always another notification, another demand, another reason to stay up, to do more, to keep pushing, to prove your worth through output. And somewhere along the way, you started to believe that rest had to be earned, that slowing down made you lazy, that taking care of your mind and body was a luxury instead of a necessity. But rest is not a reward, it's part of the process. It's where your mind reorganizes, where your nervous system recalibrates, where your ideas mature in silence, where your emotional knots slowly loosen without force. And when you deny yourself rest, you're not just getting tired, you're eroding your clarity, your joy, your ability to connect deeply and think creatively. And still, when the moment comes, when the day winds down, when your body begs for stillness, something in you fights it, the voice that says you haven't done enough, you don't deserve a break, you're falling behind. And that voice is lying, it's echoing the hustle culture you absorbed without questioning. It's masking fear as productivity. It's turning burnout into a badge of honor, but the truth is, your worth isn't measured in exhaustion, your value doesn't rise with every task you complete while tired. And if you never let yourself rest without guilt, then you're never truly resting, you're just collapsing, and that isn't sustainable, it's survival, so start small, put your phone down earlier, eat without checking messages. Take a walk without turning it into a workout. Sit in silence and breathe without feeling like you're wasting time. Because you're not wasting time, you're repairing, and the more you practice guilt-free rest, the more you realize how powerful it is to be fully restored, to show up to your life with energy instead of resentment, to create from fullness instead of depletion. And once you feel that, truly feel it, you'll stop apologizing for taking care of yourself, because rest isn't an interruption, it's a foundation. There's something quietly powerful about pausing, not because everything is perfect, not because you've figured it all out, but because you need to look at where you've been to understand who you're becoming. And in a world that constantly pushes you forward to chase more, achieve more, improve faster, you rarely get asked to sit down and trace the invisible steps you've already taken, the ways your thoughts have changed, the reactions you've softened, the things you used to tolerate but now question, the boundaries you've set. Even if shakily, because personal growth doesn't shout, it doesn't announce itself in headlines or applause. It lives in the smallest of details, in the gap between how you used to respond and how you respond now, in the moments when your silence is no longer fear but discernment, when your no is said without tremble, when your inner dialogue slowly shifts from punishment to protection. And if you don't take the time to notice these things, you might believe you're still stuck, still broken, still behind. Even when you've already outgrown an entire version of yourself, so make reflection a ritual, not a performance, not something to post or prove, but something just for you, a moment each week or month where you write or speak or simply sit with the question, how am I different than I was before, and is that difference aligned with the person I want to be? Because growth isn't linear, it's not always shiny or dramatic. Sometimes it's silent, awkward, confusing. But if you don't look back with intention, you'll lose sight of how far you've come, and you'll keep demanding change without realizing how much you've already changed. And maybe, in that space of reflection, you'll start to offer yourself more grace, more patience, more trust, because you'll see you're not who you used to be, and that's not an accident, it's evidence that something is working. There's a specific kind of strength that shows up when you look someone in the eye and say, I was wrong. Not as a tactic, not as a performance, but because you've seen a new layer of the truth and you respect it more than your pride. And in a culture obsessed with being right, with defending opinions, with doubling down even when the evidence changes, admitting fault has somehow become taboo, as if it makes you small or weak or untrustworthy. But it's the opposite. It makes you grounded, adaptable, human. Because no one gets it all right, no one sees the full picture from the start. And every belief you hold was shaped by what you knew at the time, so when you learn more, when you hear something new, when someone you care about shows you how your words landed, saying I was wrong doesn't erase your intelligence, it deepens it. And it tells the people around you that you're not here to dominate, you're here to evolve, and they feel safer in that, they relax, they open up, they trust you, not because you never make mistakes, but because you don't hide from them. And yes, it's uncomfortable because ego doesn't like being interrupted, it likes the illusion of control. But your relationships, your credibility, your peace, they don't grow in control, they grow in clarity, and clarity often requires correction. So when you feel that resistance rise, that part of you that wants to justify or shift blame or make excuses, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, is this really about being right, or is it about being real? Because the longer you avoid being wrong, the harder it becomes to change. And over time, you'll become so invested in your old perspective that you miss the wisdom waiting on the other side of it. And the irony is, the more you say, I was wrong, with honesty, the more people start to believe in your leadership, your self-awareness, your emotional integrity, and eventually, so do you. There's a voice in your head, and sometimes it doesn't speak. It hisses, it mocks, it repeats old lines from people who didn't understand you. It uses your insecurities as ammunition and disguises it as realism. And you don't remember inviting it in, you don't remember giving it authority, but there it is, saying you're not enough, not ready, not smart, not attractive, not lovable unless you perform, unless you achieve, unless you shrink, unless you change into something else. And the worst part is, you start to believe it, not all at once, but slowly, as its words become your own, and soon you're no longer living. You're managing yourself like a flawed project, constantly editing, constantly fixing, and the internal commentary becomes so constant you forget it's optional. But it is because that voice, as loud as it is, isn't you, it's a pattern, an old recording, a psychological loop that formed from fear, from rejection, from unmet needs, and you have the power to interrupt it. Not by pretending everything's perfect, not by shouting affirmations you don't believe, but by asking one small question every time it speaks. Would I say this to someone I love? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't belong in your inner dialogue either. And over time, with practice, with awareness, with boundaries even within your own mind, you can retrain that voice. You can make it kinder, more accurate, more curious. And when you do, everything changes: the risks you take, the people you attract, the habits you form, because when the voice in your head becomes an ally instead of a critic, you stop living defensively and start creating your life from a place of possibility, not punishment. You're sitting across from someone you care about, maybe a partner, maybe a friend, maybe even your child, and they're telling you something small or big, something they've said before or maybe never said until now, and your eyes are on them, but your mind is not. It's running in the background, checking the mental to-do list, replaying that awkward email you sent, wondering what's for dinner, and somewhere in the middle of their sentence, you nod out of habit, not because you heard, but because you're trained to perform attention without giving it. And later, when they say you seem distant or distracted, you'll defend yourself. I was here, I was listening, I care. But presence isn't about defending, it's about offering. It's about putting your entire mind in the same room as your body and letting them feel that, because people can tell, they can feel when you're with them fully, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, energetically. And that kind of presence is rare, especially now, when we're all split between devices and distractions and timelines and notifications, when our attention is a currency being spent before we realize it's finite. But relationships don't thrive on proximity, they thrive on presence, on eye contact that lingers, on silence that doesn't rush to be filled, on listening that isn't just waiting to respond. And if you think about the people who made you feel most seen in your life, chances are it wasn't their advice or solutions. It was the way they looked at you and nothing else. The way their stillness gave you room to unfold, to speak without shrinking, to be without performance. And maybe you've been on the other side too. Maybe you've tried to share something vulnerable only to be met with someone scrolling, someone glazing over, someone who's half there and all the way gone, and you remember how lonely that felt, how it made you pull back, close off, speak less, because why open up when no one's home? And maybe now you get to break that pattern, to be the one who stays, really stays, even when your mind wants to wander, even when there's nothing urgent being said, because it's not about urgency, it's about depth. And depth doesn't happen when you're half engaged. It happens when you train yourself to return again and again to the person in front of you, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's subtle, because your presence tells people what they mean to you far louder than your words ever will. Every day you wake up and do things: brush your teeth, check your phone, drink coffee, open tabs, answer messages, go to work, make decisions, eat meals, plan your evening, maybe go to the gym, maybe scroll, maybe call someone, maybe not, and all of that becomes your life, not in theory, but in reality, in shape, in rhythm, in memory. And yet very few people ask, do those things reflect who I actually want to be, or are they just what I've always done, what's easiest, what's expected? Because a routine isn't just a sequence of actions, it's an ecosystem of values in motion. It's a mirror of your priorities, whether you admit it or not. And when your daily life is misaligned with what matters to you, when you say you value health but skip meals or binge sugar, when you say you value focus but live inside a notification loop, when you say you value growth but never create stillness or space to reflect, your mind feels it, your body resists, your motivation collapses. You start thinking you're lazy or undisciplined or broken, but often you're just misaligned, doing things that don't match who you want to be, and the longer that goes on, the more drained and distant you feel from yourself. Like life is happening but you're not living it, like you're achieving but not fulfilled, and the truth is, you can't fake alignment. Your nervous system knows, your energy knows. Your subconscious resists anything that contradicts your core, so if you want to feel energized, motivated, clear, stop asking, how do I force myself to do this? And start asking, what would my routine look like if it was designed by my values? And then redesign your day, not in massive overhauls, but in micro decisions, in tiny shifts. Maybe you move your phone to another room while you sleep because you value peace. Maybe you take a walk instead of doom scrolling because you value clarity. Maybe you schedule 1 hour for focused creation instead of scattered multitasking because you value depth. And slowly, as those actions repeat, your days begin to support you instead of drain you. They carry you forward instead of pulling you down, and your routine becomes a rhythm you trust, because it's not random anymore, it's you in motion. You wake up and something hits you: a notification, an email, a problem, a tone in someone's voice, a reminder of something you forgot, and before your feet even hit the floor, your nervous system is on alert, already reacting, already adjusting, already bracing for what the world might throw at you today. And so your day begins not from intention, but from defense, from reactivity, from trying to contain chaos instead of create meaning. And maybe you don't even notice it at first, because it's become so normal to live like that, to bounce from one demand to another, to put out fires, to say, I'll get to my stuff later. But later rarely comes, and when it does, you're already exhausted, scattered, checked out, and you start believing you're just not good at routines or goals or habits. But the truth is, you're always managing other people's timelines, other people's moods, other people's priorities, and that leaves no room for your own. And here's where the shift happens. Proactivity is not about rigidity or control. It's about reclaiming authorship of your day before the world writes it for you. It's about waking up and asking yourself, what do I want to feel? What do I want to move forward? What really matters today? And then doing that first, even in a small way, even if it's just 15 minutes of uninterrupted creation or 10 minutes of quiet reflection or a single step towards something that fuels you, because that act of choosing, of initiating instead of reacting, rewires your relationship with time, with purpose, with power, and it signals to your brain, I'm not just surviving today, I am participating in it. And yes, things will still go wrong, people will still interrupt, the world won't stop throwing curveballs. But when you've anchored your day in intention, those disruptions don't shake you the same way. They don't decide the tone of your entire week because you've already chosen your rhythm, and that rhythm, over time, becomes confidence, not the loud kind, but the deep kind, the kind that says, no matter what today brings, I know what I'm here to do, and I'll do it first. It's late and your body is tired, maybe your mind too, flickering with the static of everything left unfinished, unanswered, unresolved. And as you lie down, the instinct is to scroll, to distract, to fade out of the day like it never really belonged to you in the first place. Because endings are hard, they hold silence, reflection, sometimes regret, and nobody teaches you how to close a day with care, how to let go without tension, how to tell your nervous system, it's enough now. You can stop trying to fix or improve or outrun something. And maybe you've lived most of your life falling asleep mid-scroll, mid-worry, mid-overthinking, carrying today into tomorrow without pause, without boundary, as if one long, anxious sentence that never ends. But imagine this. You sit on the edge of your bed or you lie quietly for a moment before turning off the light. And instead of replaying what went wrong or what's missing or what still needs to be done, you take a slow breath and ask one small thing. What did today give me that I didn't expect? What moment did I survive that I didn't think I could? What did I do right even if nobody saw it? What made me feel even if it was difficult? And you don't force it to be profound. You don't dress it up for social media or pretend it was perfect. You just notice, quietly, what was true. Maybe someone smiled at you on the street. Maybe you said no to something you used to tolerate. Maybe your coffee was just the right temperature. Maybe you felt proud for a second. Maybe you didn't, but you still showed up. You still carried the weight. Still tried your best in ways no one claps for. And maybe that's enough to be grateful for, not in the grandiose, performative way people use that word sometimes, but in the quiet, self-honoring way that says, I see me, I acknowledge this day, I allow it to rest, and in doing that, you start to rewire something deep, because the mind trained in urgency forgets that completion isn't about perfection. It's about presence, and when you end your day in gratitude, even if the day was hard or messy or disappointing, you reclaim your authority to define it, not by what lacked, but by what remained, what endured, what mattered even a little. And if you do that often enough, your brain stops fearing nightfall, stops associating darkness with spinning thoughts or unresolved tension, and instead starts to recognize the signal. We're done now, we're safe now, we're allowed to pause and acknowledge. Because this life isn't just about what you chase, it's about what you notice, what you hold gently, what you allow to close without punishment. So next time you reach for your phone before bed, maybe try this instead. Reach for one memory, one effort, one breath that mattered today. Hold it like a small light in your chest, and tell yourself not everything is fixed, not everything is finished, but I'm still here, I'm still learning, and for that alone, thank you today.